Well, can I say, like, I had a secular Jewish friend in college who saw Lion and the Witch and the Wardrobe with me, and he was like, "Wow, that's a really nice." All those kids were struggling with having no father in the home, and they projected it into this talking lion character. And I said, "Do you realize this is just some big? It's just a giant allegory for the gospel." And he's like, "Oh, come on, you Christians, you see everything through the lens. Like, Jesus isn't everywhere, guys."
That's an example of like you winning an internet debate before it happened.
Oh man. I hadn't heard that one before. That was pretty awesome.
Yeah, that is remarkable. It is in fact remarkable. Why is my phone going crazy? What on earth?
And also, I like the image that was there before the actual video played of a very special Dragon Ball Z where Goku peed on the edge of the world.
Hey, that's a very special Gene Luen Yang book.
I was going to say, should I tell him or do you want to?
It may be the best Gene Luen Yang book. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that, Tootless?
I thought you liked Boxers and Saints.
I do love Boxers and Saints. I love Boxers and Saints. I like Boxers and Saints. I like American Born Chinese, and I like the
Shadow Hero.
The Shadow Hero a lot. Of those three, I like really a lot. I know the I'm less fond of Dragon Hoops. But I also really like the Monkey Prince, which also Twitless and I just do not have middle ground on at all.
The Shadow Hero is probably his most enjoyable work. If you just you're picking up and trying to enjoy something to read, if I'm being honest. Yes. I think my biggest criticism of him is that he really only has one story to tell, and so American Born Chinese is, I think, his most. It's his first go at it, and so in some ways, I think it's his most genuine take on it. So, I mean, I don't know if I'd argue that point.
On the note, though, I gotta come back on something that I just found out. Just like last week, I found out I was listening to actually it was 2 weeks ago. I was listening to a podcast that I was fixing the steering in my van, and that was a whole ordeal. But I was listening to Pints with Aquinas podcasts. And one of the things that I learned is if in Boxers and Saints, there's that one fellow that teaches 4Girl about Jesus, the doctor who is a heroin addict, right? That's based on an actual dude. It's not based on it. It is an actual dude. I can't remember the fellow's name, but he's actually been canonized because he went to martyrdom and volunteered for martyrdom. Before in hoping to save the people around him during the Boxer Rebellion. And somebody who struggled with drug addiction and all that kind of stuff that comes with opium. But it's I thought it was a fanciful and an interesting way of looking at the times in which it was written, but it's a real dude. It's a very different saint than the others that are obliquely mentioned in the work. So I know that's probably not enough to change your opinion on the thing at all, but I found it fascinating.
No, my biggest issue see, now that I've read enough Yang, back when we were reading that, I was holding back and not saying the things I really felt. Now that I've read enough Yang to have gone weary of him, I can say I'm not entirely convinced Yang is the type. I have some doubts about his Christianity. If you've seen the recent, if you've seen like Hollywood types, when they sort of find religion, and even if they mention Jesus, you'll get this kind of like weird, like blend of like paganism and other things. And they, you know what I mean? Like, it's like, they say, oh, Jesus is great and salvation. They start saying some of the buzzwords. And you go, this sounds good for a minute. And they're saying positive things about Jesus. And then you start hearing some other things that make you concerned. And you go,
Mel Gibson's out there.
Or Jim Caviezel, right? I think it's pretty genuine. But Hey, Dave. So my thing with Boxers and Saints is that I'm like, if this is Yang's kind of like bastardized version of Christianity, I'm not sure he's got it, and that was kind of, you know, very sobering, because the character, one of the main characters in that book, like I said, I don't know if she understood what salvation was. It was just like it's a troubling book, and if you try to think about what it means to really have faith in a redeeming Savior Lord. Because if you don't really have a functional understanding, like even the Thief on the Cross was not a doctrinal scholar, but he understood essentially, I think, the basics, which was I'm bad, and you save me. And you had to have at least those two pieces. If you show up and go, church is nice, they serve me biscuits, and they're nice to me, and therefore I'm going to be a Christian.
I think you're really understating.
And then later, even if you die for that church, if you didn't have the salvation experience, you know, I am the way, the truth, and life. No one gets to the Father but by me. If you don't have that personal relationship with Jesus, it doesn't matter how churchy you are. And like I said, there's some very concerning elements in Boxers and Saints when you try to like tease out a salvation narrative, and it ends up being to me, it was leaning heavily pluralistic. Jesus is part of this, you know, monomyth kind of garbage, and it's like, no, Jesus is not part of a monomyth. Jesus is the truth, and that's it.
So, right. So like it's like since we're going to be leaning very heavily into C.S. Lewis in this particular show, right? Sure. So one of the big conflates, one of the big arguments that Lewis had with Tolkien was that obviously Jesus is mythic, and Tolkien says yes, but what if he's the myth that is true? And that's kind of the thing on that. I mean, you have everything about this little Jesus story is falls within mythic paradigms. But
why was he having that argument with Tolkien?
Because Tolkien was an evangelical Catholic, and this was before Lewis's conversion.
Oh.
Yeah. That was before Lewis's conversion. Like a mean church. Dave, were you Southern Baptist? Dave says, I like a mean church.
There you go. First off, the Southern Baptists are nice. The ones that are mean are the Independent Baptists. So if you're talking about the mean Baptists, it's the IBC. It's not the SBC.
You want a mean church? The first one I went to growing up was a Church of Christ. That was a mean church.
Yeah, so, I think there's mean. I've met mean people in every. Well, I can't say every faith tradition.
It was a really big, cliquey church.
I've never met a Sikh. But I've met mean people in many faith traditions, Christian and Christian adjacent and non-Christian and all sorts of them. So I think meanness is the foundational position of the human spirit.
So to boil it down, so I can state my argument succinctly. My problem with Boxers and Saints is that it's smacked of religious pluralism. And like I said, and that's not my version of Christianity. And if that's Yang's version of it, because his biggest thing is trying to reconcile, in some cases, things that are very difficult to reconcile or plain out irreconcilable. And if that's his attempt on it, I'm not buying it. So.
Well, that was the very first thing I noticed, even when I learned that this was a thing for the first time, that he is equating, like so many people do, religion with race and culture, as if they're somehow inborn, and that's a problem right there.
Yeah, I think there's definitely some postmodern racial politics that plays into it, but I don't necessarily believe that it's pluralistic. I think we're just looking at stylistic issues that have to do with how somebody looks at a culture artistically. But that being said, this show is not really about Yang.
Even though every show is technically about Yang when Twitless is here.
That's not true. You really brought it up. If you're going to bring it up, I'm going to make my opinion known. I don't bring them up.
I mean, realistically, Yang is a childish thing.
I think we all know. I think we all know that no matter what, Reese will find a way to bait Twitless into a conversation about Yang.
No, it's not Reese even.
No.
It's not even Reese. It's like it's starting with you. You're the one who's starting this now.
I didn't say anything about it. He
That's
brought
true.
it
No,
up.
you did mention that it was from the very special episode of Dragon Ball Z when we know.
No,
I
that
made
wasn't
the Dragon
me.
Ball
Oh, that
Z.
was Larry.
I made that joke
Was
because
that
I
Larry?
I
I'm
know
sorry.
from a
I'm
Yang
sorry.
comic.
You
I got
you
that. I
never
got that.
give me the credit for the things I do come up with, and now you,
I'm sorry, man. I just got
Now
confused with that side of the screen. That's it.
Now the thing that we bring
Oh,
up every show is baiting Reese to talk about how much he hates Kingdom Come.
I do.
And
That's-
this also
that's real.
and it's also fitting for the topic because Kingdom Come was about putting away childish things like fun.
oh, no.
That's being too harsh.
Oh,
That's
dear.
yeah.
Don't make
anyway,
me
no.
don't make me defend Mark Waid again.
Besides, fun isn't childish.
I hate defending Mark Waid.
Jim Tuner asks, "Is Dragon Ball Z Christian and has hell and sort of a god?" I have not read enough Dragon Ball to even
No,
it is
it's
not.
it's more Buddhist. That's
Yeah,
the way
I
see
would,
things.
I would suspect that being based on the journey to the West more severely than Boxers and Saints, that it's surely more Buddhist on that.
I
In
have
the words heaven and hell are
always-
just translations for the English version. They don't
Yeah.
even use those in the Japanese.
I've always wondered why they actually went and named a character Satan.
That's a good question. I have no idea. Oh, hey, bring up also Superman or Blankets. I've never read Blankets, so
I'm starting it. It's something.
I
Basically-
intentionally avoided reading Blankets when I had my graphic memoir class.
Blankets-
I dodged
Blankets
and
is-
weaved around that thing like a master.
You should have read it actually, because Blankets is Doug TenNapel if Doug TenNapel stopped being a Christian and gave up his faith.
Wow. Okay,
So,
damn
that
it. That's
sounds
a sell. It does sound terrible.
Now
but it
wait,
also
do you
sounds
are
like
you
a-
saying
I'm telling you, if you pick up Blankets and
That
in the
sounds-
first like 20 pages, you'll go, "Who's drawing this? Is this Doug TenNapel?" It's like I said, they have
now are you saying
they have a brother drawing
curious.
styles, and both of them have at the center issues with faith and Christianity.
I'm curious though, are you saying this is Doug TenNapel if he wasn't a Christian, or are you very specifically saying if he walked away from his own faith?
Both.
Interesting.
That's a hell of a that's a hell of a selling point. Abigail in the chat says what a good endorsement for everything but the end. Yeah, I had negative interest in reading Blankets until you said that, and now I may have to.
I know. All I have to
Yeah.
do is say Doug TenNapel, and you break your
Well, not
poke
just
your ears
not
out.
just that, but I mean like the juxtaposition, right? Because
No,
like
yeah.
right, because like Doug's whole like philosophy ties into his art so much. To see somebody else who would approach their philosophy that way is an intriguing thing in and of itself.
Matt Krotz and I were noticing just like the art style being so very similar,
Mhm,
and then the creator of Blankets ends up saying some very interesting things. He said, when you grow up in a rural area, he said, and he was just musing, but he said, Craig Thompson said something like, people who grow up in rural areas as opposed to urban, he said, there's a natural inclination to believe in God because you have so much empty space, you can just stare at the sky. And so I think you can definitely see this, like I said, a kind of a brotherly relationship between him and what Doug T are channeling just in their earthen approach to sequential art. But yeah.
Well, and that is that's actually, man, that in itself is a whole thing of thought, because the ruralness of Bechdel's upbringing is a huge factor in her story too. And that whole small town life and everything.
Bechdel is in the Bechdel test?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Alison Bechdel is like my nemesis. She doesn't know it, but but no, like it's funny in reading. In fact, I think I have it.
Fun Home.
Fun Home. I think it's actually sitting on my shelf.
I hated Fun Home.
Well, I didn't like Fun Home either, but everything that she hated about growing up were things that I loved about growing up. I mean, she
everything about Fun Home, just as a comic, everything about Fun Home as a work of literature and as a comic, it's everything I hate, because it's the exact type of navel gazing that just thinks that I'm just so smart. Let me just show you how smart I am.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think,
and it's
I struggle with that myself, but I mean, like the way that life impacted, like the way the very things in life impacted each of us in the exact opposite direction. And it's I mean, my dad didn't commit suicide, or maybe, but you know,
I was going to say, like, you can track a lot of this boils down to the fact that, you know, her relationship with her father is so utterly broken.
Oh yeah, well, with everyone around her, yeah.
Well, the dad specifically is the linchpin here, because not only is he a bad father, but she has to struggle with the fact that he's a pederast. Which she slightly glazes over, but it's like you can tell how much of her identity, I think,
slightly, just barely, and only because his pederasty supersedes her own coming out story, like the links are realigned.
But you can tell how much psychological damage, even without her saying it, because I don't think she actually says it. But you can tell just by reading it just how much damage that does to her, and the fact that she has to reconcile her own identity in light of that. And that's how I interpret that piece.
Well, and definitely, and then also, like, in her interview with Shoot, just talking about like her attitudes toward Mouse and previous comic artists that came before that, and the Johnny Come Latelyness of her attitudes. I mean, she's just like the polar opposite of everything that like, you know, my comic journey and my life journey have been. So can
we not talk about my least favorite people, Hillary Shute?
Okay,
and
that's fine.
Well, and Jean Yang. It's just like a cavalcade of everything.
Let's go ahead here and actually use this discussion of things and childhood trauma to bring in the chosen topic for tonight, which I sprung everybody with like 6 hours ago or whatever it was. And I want to talk about right as this says, this is depressing. Talk about something else. You got it, Jim. So we want to talk about childish things, right? The idea that there is a scripture from Paul, and I can't remember the book it is in, and forgive me for not looking this up, but when I was young, when I was a child, I spoke like a child, but when I was grown, I put away childish things. And there is in the air and in the wind right now, there is this. It's
Corinthians 1:13.
Oh, thank you.
No. 1 Corinthians 13.
1 Corinthians 13:11. Excuse me.
Okay. Well, there we go. Anyway. There is this debate going on right now in the Twitter sphere about the nature of
about the four-way brawl between Doug Tenaple, Geeks and Gamers, and Greg Alexopoulos and Matt Walsh.
George, I wasn't going to mention any names,
but those are all the names.
Those are many of the names.
Like, at this point, we might as well just like not beat around the bush. Like, there's a bloody four-way brawl. More people pile on.
There's not. That's the problem. There's not. There are people that are lying, and there are people that are telling truths that other people don't want to hear. And that's the situation.
I don't know if I agree. I don't know if I agree with this take.
I also feel like it's a bunch of people talking past each other too. Like, a lot of this isn't even direct confrontation.
That's exactly what I'm saying. So there are people. There are people that started making assumptions about other people and misrepresenting their positions intentionally in order to stir up trouble and grandize themselves.
Isn't that all of Twitter?
As a result,
Reese, I hate to tell you this.
Conversation about
Reese, one of the people who was not arguing in good faith at the beginning was Doug TenNapel.
I disagree entirely.
I expected you would, but that's why I said it's quite a bit of an exchange here. But
I just don't understand how this is different from the rest of Twitter.
So I wanted to take a look at step back from that specific sort of drama and look at the big picture about what are childish things and what is the purpose of art in that kind of thing. And so if you're going to put away childish things, first of all, does that even make sense? Second of all, what does it mean to put something away? And thirdly, what are childish things?
All right. So if you want to have this conversation, then you actually should pull up 1 Corinthians 13. It's a fairly brief chapter, and it covers quite a few topics. And when we start having these conversations, one of the more important things to do, especially when you're dealing with a verse in Scripture, is to not just read the Greek. One. Okay, well, there's that, but to at least read it in context, right?
The context on this is really cool.
People will pull like one verse out of context and use it as Reese has alluded to. They'll use it as a dictum, and it's like, well, did you read the verse before or after? I'm not saying it completely changes anything necessarily, but reading that full context is necessary to understand the full message of what the author of that particular book and verse is saying. In this case, Paul, in an epistle to the church at Corinth.
Right.
And this is the very famous, it's actually interesting because this is 1 Corinthians 13. This is one of the more important chapters in the Bible because it's the one that discusses love.
Right. But one of the things I want to break for just a second. We got some real fire in the chat that I think is great. Marmaduke brings up an excellent point. Alcohol in the Bible was non-alcoholic, poking fun at the fact that this is, in some ways, we're looking at a what is the effect of the thing, not the thing itself, and that is one of the issues, which I thought was a great comment. Second, Jim Tuner says context is for kings. None of you is a king. I don't believe that's the line, but it was great to look at. So, yeah, if we want to dissect the text, that's fine. I don't necessarily think we need to.
I don't think we need to dissect it, but it's still important to read it.
Love never fails, but where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. Where there's knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when completeness comes, what is part disappears. When I was a child, I talked like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put the ways of the child behind me. For now we see only face. Now I know.
I got to read the beginning part. This is a short chapter. You got to start. You got to start with the beginning. This is one of the most important chapters, like in the Bible. If I speak in the tongues of men and angels, but have not love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and surrender my body to the flames, but have not love, I gain nothing. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It is not rude. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. But where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. Where there is knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when perfection comes, the imperfect disappears. When I was a child, I talked like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put childish ways behind me. Now we see but a poor reflection as in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part. Then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. And now these three remain, faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. And that is the full context of the child verse.
Right.
And I think it's very telling that this is part of a larger verse that basically says all things, including your own growing up, all of it passes away. The important thing to focus on isn't growing up, not growing. The important thing is no matter what, love is the greatest thing that we can be. Love is the greatest thing that we can show to each other. And like I said, that's where the entire concept of this, it's part of that larger conversation. So we don't have to dissect the entire chapter, but it is important.
Right. Except I think you got it wrong.
Well, no, that's what the section
what the
of
verse
Bible
says.
there
What are you
said.
talking about? What are you talking about?
No, it's not. The thing is it's not that growing up isn't important. It's that growing up is love, right? Love is that mark of maturity, right? The things that are not those petty things are childish, and when I put away childish things as an adult, that's talking about living that life of love. Right, so that's that thing is that love is that primary thing that and so what is that love, and it defines how that all shakes out and how we're looking at at creating and working toward the best, right? That's what makes it the primary thing.
See, I think it's talking about it as an allegory that when you accept the path of Christ into your soul, you embrace love, you truly become an adult and are able to pass into salvation. I think that's more where it's going. But
right, but it's also, we're looking at that, like, faith, hope, and love remain. So we're looking at things that shape our daily life too. So hey, here we go. Mrs. H has a great observation. Childish things are selfish desires and actions, right? As opposed to self-sacrificially giving of yourself and looking for what's greater, what's better for other people, right? So when we're looking at childish things, we're looking at things that are feeding our own pleasure centers, that are feeding our own desires, and that are feeding our own needs, with not worrying about how that impacts other people around us, right? So
I'm not saying that's wrong, but I'm not entirely certain, because the verse doesn't say, if the point of the verse was to say love is growing up, it would have said that. And I don't think that's exactly what that's not what it's saying.
Entirely is. So all the predicate before that line is what is love.
Let Reese, I get to finish the thought before you jump.
Okay.
So I'm not saying that you're entirely wrong, but that's not. I think what the. So I'm not. How do I put this? Because I'm not. The idea that doing not love is being childish. That's not what the logic, I think, is being put here. I think the way I kind of read it, and this might be just a slight, because the end of this is that. It's this is hard to put into words.
You're going deep here.
Do you mind if I take a whack at it?
Well, I mean, I think it also, we have to talk about what kind of love are we talking about here. Are we talking about agape? Because it feels like the verse is talking about agape.
Oh yes, absolutely.
I'm pretty sure that's what's being used here.
Can we square the circle with maturity? Is that that kind of overlaps with childishness to adulthood, and it overlaps with this sense of
I think so, because
embodying
ultimately the most matured person is the grandparent who plays games with the young kids so that they can grow. But they're playing games, but they're doing so in a very mature way.
But using this verse about love being the thing that's the pathway out, being selfless and all that, dispensing with the childish things of being, self-centered, is that's how that's loving, and that's how that is adult.
See, when I pair the two verses together, because the second verse is the mirror darkly, and the mirror darkly has it, the way I see it, has a lot more to do with your ability to see things more clearly. It's maturity, but not it's maturity in this just the sense that as you grow, you can see more, you can understand more. And so you become not less childish, but more aware. Because it doesn't just say, because like adults can be just as petty and not loving, and kids can be more like, who has more unconditional love in some respects than children? We almost have to learn some of the prejudices and hatefulness that we get. Some of that actually comes more with age. We know this. We've seen crusty old people who are way less loving than they should be, and young people who are far more loving than they should be.
How do you enter the kingdom of heaven? Do you enter it as like a child, right? Or do you enter it like a crusty old man? You know, there's an angle there too.
And I mean, if you want to get the whole elephants to the eye of the needle thing, that gets into the whole how selfishness is, a root sin. You go the Buddhist route, selfishness becomes attachment.
So, okay, let's go ahead and put the screen, since we're going in here.
You guys thoroughly reviewed
I was just using
and
this.
It's not even hour one
to talk over Lewis. We're in the weeds here. We're in the weeds.
Well, no, we're not in the weeds.
This is not the
we're
weeds.
defining the terms.
This is where it comes from.
We're defining the terms.
Apparently, you don't realize how many weeds there are.
Well, no.
I agree with Abigail. Somebody break out the Greek.
Yeah, I'm getting ready. I got Blue Letter Bible on a thing. I just got to remember.
The critics read the verse wrong, and Lewis's critique of the critics, which is what we have up here, is framed in the same sort of dialogue and analysis that Twitless brought up, and I agree with Twitless on.
No, I don't. They didn't though. People are misinterpreting.
I think they only quoted the one part.
Right.
They only quoted the one part because
no, they didn't. No, they didn't. No, they didn't. That's the thing.
Very Mattriarchy.
are on the thing. So this screen is so tiny on here. It's so stupid. Let me see if I can bring it up a little bit bigger there. Okay, it's legible in full screen. So let me go ahead and go check over it here. Yeah, but I couldn't. I mean, I guess that doesn't necessarily matter, but full screen. Go over here. Okay, so the whole pericope, right? And I have not charity, right? And it is the word agape, by the way. I did look it up, pulled out the tools and looked it up that way. So we're looking at it that way. So,
unconditional. So for just
so
the
we're
audience,
looking at
love with no unconditional
right?
love with no strings.
And if
Love
I
for
may point
it's
out,
love with no other reason for the sake of being.
So the entire thing is saying that it doesn't matter what you do. If love isn't your motivating factor, then it's useless, right? And that love, agape love, is looking for the best for other people, right? It's about building into those other people, right? So self-sacrificial, however you want to shape that out, on there. So we've got this whole thing: love never faileth. There'll be prophecies, they'll fail; or there'll be tongues, they'll cease. There'll be knowledge, they'll vanish away. For we know in part, we prophesy in part. But what was perfect is come; that which is shall be done away with. Okay, so there we have that thought. When I was a child, I spake as a child, understood as a child, I thought as a child. But in command, I put away childish things. So, do you think this putting away childish things is before the understanding of love or after the understanding of love?
No, that's sorry. That's not the direction I'm taking this in.
Right, no. I know. But I think that's why I think you're wrong. Is because we have.
I can't be wrong if that's not the direction I'm taking it in, Reese. That's not.
Yeah, but
if that's not my
the way
point,
you're taking it, it's about the way the text.
If that's Reese, if it's not my point, then I can't be wrong about a point that I didn't make.
Right. Okay.
This is great.
Also,
I hope the chat is entertained with this.
Yeah,
but
you
Reese,
absolutely can. You could be mangling scripture to misplace your understanding of a thing.
What is my understanding? No, Reese. What is my understanding of the thing then?
Well, my understanding of the thing was that love, the proper point of love, is a process of maturity and growing up, and that's what this whole statement is about. This is what the ideal is. Here is the situation where I was not meeting that ideal. I put that away as I became a man, right? So 13 is a framing device to reflect back upon the previous 10 verses on an understanding of what love is, and a way of applying these lofty ideas of love to a daily life.
11 and 12 are paired. You
Right.
can't just read, you have to read them
For
both.
now, we see through a glass darkly. Where are they at? Are they living life so love at all in the church is which we includes Paul? Is Paul in a life of love at this moment?
I don't see where you're going with this.
Right. No, Paul is also seeing through a glass darkly.
Yeah.
But then
we all
see face to face. So he's looking to okay, if we're trying to live a life of love now, if I was a child and I thought as a child, but now I've put away childish things and I'm looking toward love to be my guiding principle, right? I still don't do it right. So in the future, we will see clearly, because we are progressively becoming more mature in Christ, right? And moving toward that. And of course, I would project this out into past death as well. I think that's a fairly thing. So we're talking about
and God, you're
charity.
thinking like God is love. So as we become more godly,
okay. So when I said
loving.
I think I misspoke, and I think I'm being slightly taken in a direction I didn't intend. So let me try to clarify. Okay.
And I could be jumping. I could be jumping.
Well, yeah. because clearly maturity is part of what we're seeing here. There is something I think more going on to this verse as well as in much scripture, which is I don't think love is just the journey. It's kind of the destination. Maybe that's trying to let me think. If that's what I'm trying to say.
The journey is the destination.
Yeah, it's both, right? Right.
So, that's kind of where I was going. That's kind of what I was trying to say there. Okay.
But I also want to say that this whole line of discourse is kind of getting into the weeds now, because
now we're definitely in the weeds.
No, because the people who made that criticism in the time of Lewis
absolutely.
weren't reading the Blue Letter Bible. They were using that within the framework of the Victorian culture where children should be seen and not heard. So it's very easy to say to someone, well, that's very childish, so you should put that away as a method of social control and regulation.
And what Larry's point that he's bringing up, which has to do with a very long debate that goes, I know it goes before this, but my familiarity with it has to do with the Oxford movement versus the masculine Christians, which happened in the Victorian period, which is these ideas that are very strictly, and I think this is probably why I pushed back a little bit when we were framing this verse as maturity, because if we're just thinking about, well, this is just part of maturity, then we often, I think, start planting flags. And this ties into the debate we're seeing on Twitter, where I plant this flag. This is where spiritual maturity is, and this is where spiritual immaturity is. And if you're on my side of the line, then you are there's the key word, especially for the masculine Christians. When I became a man, okay, there's this dividing line, and the masculine Christians, people like crap.
Are you gonna call Matt Walsh a masculine Christian?
Oh gosh, yes.
I mean, he's not, but
he's also somewhat of a pot stirrer, so you have to take what he's
definitely leaning. He's definitely arguing.
Yeah.
He's arguing. He would like to be.
He's arguing pseudo-trad Christianity because he knows there's money in it for him.
He's okay.
Well, I think that's a little mercenary of a take.
He and Doug TenNapel, when they make certain statements, I'm not talking about who they are 100% as genuine people, but when certain statements, the ones that have gotten a lot of buzz, okay, the ones that tend to be debated the most, they tend to surround.
This is why we're here.
They tend to surround those flags that are planted, and they tend to. And there is like I say, if you go to the masculine Christians, you'll see the crap. Who wrote Westward Ho? It was
no idea.
Hold on. I'm blanking. Give me a second. I gotta Google real fast. Charles Kingsley.
Yeah,
Charles Kingsley was one of the big muscular. It's one of the big muscular Christians, right? So you have this these flags that get planted, and it's again, if you're on my side of the maturity line, as I define maturity, you're a man, and if you're on the other side of that maturity line, you are not a man. And if we and this debate in the Victorian period the push and pull was between, like I said, the Oxford movements, who believed in more of the, I would call, passive Jesus. In today's day and age, we might call him hippie love Jesus, versus the masculine Jesus, which is, if I'm being reductive, whip Jesus, temple cleaning Jesus. And people would
if you don't have a sword, sell your clothes, Jesus.
People would stake their flags and say that essentially, if you think about it, there's a case that you can make depending on which side of that. If you're seeing it that way, if you're in one of those two camps, then you could say, well, whip Jesus, if that's the kind of Jesus you believe in, that's the childish one. That's the one that wants to play cowboys and Indians, and that's the one you're supposed to put away when you become a man and be more loving, and therefore less aggressive. However, conversely, you can, if you are on the masculine side of the equation, you can say, okay, being a passive little child who doesn't pull up his bootstraps, put on his belt, and clean that temple when it needs to be cleaned, you are the one who needs to grow up and become a man and do the man's work. And so all the way back to at least the Victorian period, I'm sure it was before that as well, but those threads and those understandings of manhood, love, and maturity, I think, are partially behind some of those current Twitter feuds, or at least they are perceived to be what is behind those Twitter feuds.
Which is funny, since like Jesus is kind of just like a dad, sort of, and sometimes dads have to do both. He's just like, yo guys, you're handling the situation.
Well, yeah, I mean, and that's the thing, is it's a false dichotomy. Both things have to be true, and that's the thing that bothers me the most about this situation, is that like one side is claiming, oh, you just think X, and the other side is claiming, no, we don't actually. And that's the situation we find ourselves in, is that some people are misrepresenting the whole position.
I'm going to push back a little bit, Reese. Both sides of that argument, I'm going to push back a little bit.
They're not, because the situation we have there, and this is why, like, I didn't want to get into this part of it, because I think the broader issue can be discussed without bringing it up personally. But the fact of the matter is that this started because George Alexopoulos, and I can't believe I'm saying this live because I didn't want to deal with this way, openly brought up a tweet represented it and lied about it to make a political point, arguing with an entertainer, claiming that entertainer is against entertainment, and that is stupid. This whole thing started because of that.
I see how you see it that way, but
that's exactly what happened, man. I don't think that's exactly what happened.
I'm really curious, because I kind of see it that way too. I want to hear.
I gotta cut it. I'm gone. I'm out of here.
No. Okay. Pretend I'm Matt Reese, because I actually kind of think of it the same way Matt does, as far as what George Alexopoulos did. If we're going to relitigate that, we might, like, I want to hear. I'm really interested in Twitless having like a different opinion on this.
So, like,
if we can salvage the stream.
No,
we can't.
We totally can't. And the thing is that all right, if we're gonna do this, someone needs to pull up one of those tweets, because I'm not gonna put words in people's mouths, because if we're gonna talk about what people said and didn't say, I like to look at the words themselves.
Yeah, I don't know the tweets, but I do have access to put things up on stream. So
that was from a while ago. I don't remember when that Twitter
made the rounds
happened. It was a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
So that's kind of
here's my thing. I'm not saying, oh my gosh, I'm entirely on one side of the camp here. When I looked at that debate, I ended up rolling my eyes at everybody involved, because very few people, in my opinion, in the Twitter thread. Here's the interesting thing, is that people on Twitter, especially the people we're talking about, will engage in occasionally saying genuine things that they 100% believe in, and then sometimes just flat out baiting you and trolling you.
I think Matt, I'm channeling Matt Reese. I think he 100% agrees with you.
Yeah. And that's when I said I was pushing back a little bit. I wanted a chance to kind of like flesh out my thought without getting too into this person said this and this person was I wanted to approach it with what I felt was nuance. I feel like we can still do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
and we can discuss
Reese,
it
come
without
back.
discussing them.
Reese, come back. I'm not going to just tell you that you're wrong or that, and we don't have to get into an argument about, we can take this in a different direction. But if I recall correctly, I think there's a difference between statements that are, how should I go about this? To my recollection, Matt Walsh was clearly doing his bit, which is to oversell some of his points, I think he said a couple times, I'm going to be the cranky dad, and I'm going to say things like, get off my lawn, and anime is... Didn't he say anime was satanic? I think that was the big...
Yes, he did.
Probably satanic, yeah.
I think he said...
He also attacked video games, but he attacked it from a very limited and reductive perspective on video games.
Well, the thing is, Matt Walsh has, in fact... I watched this, so I did some homework. Matt Walsh played Grand Theft Auto live on Daily Wire, I think it was.
Oh, funny.
So the idea that Matt Walsh is...
I saw the show. Sorry, somebody was talking to me. I saw the exact show where he said that too. He said that anime is probably satanic. I have no exact reason for it. It's just a gut feeling, but I'm pretty sure it's satanic.
So
it's just a shock jock.
But it was part of his cancel segment, which is always a joke every single time.
Right, yeah. When he's playing Grand Theft Auto, he's mixing some things I think that he does genuinely think. But he was clearly playing the game. So if he's clearly like so against the video games as some people have taken him to be, why was he sitting there with the controller with a smile on his face while he shot people? So there was a couple moments where he started to critically examine that and say, I'm not sure if this is the healthiest thing to have your kids do all the time. But he played it and he was clearly having a good time, and he was still channeling his grumpy, grouchy, I'm going to say kind of like, this is for commies kind of an argument. So that's Matt Walsh.
Definitely a shock jock. Like,
right.
So
that's Matt Walsh.
I would put on a different hat from a different aspect of my life. A lot of the people who work as political activists say things they don't mean and don't believe because they know it will move the needle. They know it will move the people who do believe those things and do think those things towards their candidate, towards their cause, and most importantly, for reference to Matt Walsh, for donation. So that is, in my opinion, the frame of reference that Matt Walsh comes out of.
Yeah, he started at the bottom of the card, as it were, with Daily Wire, and now he's bigger than Clavin. He's bigger than that Italian guy who I don't even remember the name of.
He's bigger than everybody except Shapiro at this point.
Yeah. And week to week, he's bigger than Shapiro, depending on the controversy, it seems. Absolutely. He's a title card guy now.
So that's Matt Walsh. So here's
George,
the thing.
in my personal opinion from George, is he was a talented artist who got hooked into that space of people like Matt Walsh and like Tim Pool, and so he started doing that sort of material and getting stupidly popular.
So here's the thing about George's position, because I identify and even agree with the spirit, I think, of what George is trying to get at, even if there are some rhetorical problems or eye-rolling things, people talking past each other, as Metal said, which I think is very accurate. George Alexopoulos he chose Matt Walsh to respond to. And according to George, he said this tweet, because Twitter will pull out old tweets sometimes, I think, and like, because on your For You, if you're on your phone, it doesn't always pull in chronological order. It just pulls in what it thinks.
5 years old.
So I don't know about that, but like George said, here's the thing.
Another reason for George.
I'm still channeling Matt Reese here. So
No.
There's a good reason why George picked Matt Walsh, and it's because it already started up. I like George. This is no slight against him, but he has a history of doing this. Every time he's got something to promote, just before he starts promoting it, he gets some type of controversy thrown his way, so that all the eyes are pointing at him.
Yep.
Okay.
Not a coincidence.
Let me do the genuine. Let me give a. This is my
Good
faith representation of how George could have done this. I'm not saying this is the way it happened. But if someone else dug through a tweet and responded to it, and then George saw it on his feed because he's someone he followed, it is possible to see I've seen old tweets before. Okay.
Yeah.
They have come across my feed, and I didn't necessarily go hunting 10 years for them. Okay. So it is within the realm of possibility for a person to see another person's old tweet on their feed. That is a possibility. So I'm gonna throw that out there. It doesn't negate anyone else's other point. So the spirit that George is addressing, and this is the thing I actually do. I'm a fellow traveler with him in it, and there is a truth here, and it's something that we know, which is the fact that there are people in conservatism, people on the political right, who poo-poo. I've talked to them. You can't tell me these people don't exist because I've talked to them. I've seen them talk.
Yeah.
I'm not going to name names, but I've
a
literally
valid
had
concern.
It's a valid concern where you get an older, sometimes they're boomers, sometimes it's just older conservative who goes, these video games, or anime, that's just for stupid kids. They get this very crusty kind of dismissal towards things that not only the things that people like, because it's fine to poo-poo on someone's thing, and just because if you're being a cranky old man, that there's, it's your right as an American to do that. The thing that George was reacting to, and this is the thing that I actually do agree with, is the fact that if you are in a culture war, if that's a thing that we believe exists, and it's right versus left, or what have you, if that's how you want to paint it, then it's important to not just dismiss an entire battlefield. It's, you can't just
abdicate it. Yeah.
Right. You can't just say, you know what, we're going to have a great Air Force, but what's a Navy? You just can't do that. Like, if you don't have a Navy, you're going to have this giant hole in your ability to wage any type of war. That's my terrible analogy.
I think Matt Reese completely agrees.
Now, I want
Yeah.
to take Twitless's good point, and I want to go back to the C.S. Lewis for a moment.
Okay.
Because
right.
my take is the Victorian Puritan thing that Lewis was responding to.
Uh-huh.
Lewis was responding to it in a way that is somewhat Freudian in its analysis. That a child who is very insecure becomes selfish, becomes very harmful, becomes very sinful. And this verse is speaking about pure love, being not insecure. To quote Lewis, the thing is, I give up childish things, especially the concern about being childish, which goes perfectly back to this political conversation, because it's being framed out of a place on both sides of the political argument of insecurity. People wanting to take away my anime because they're boomer conservatives who don't understand things, and these people don't understand how these Chinese funny cartoons are leading them into immorality.
If I can flip the script, because I wanted to explain George's side before I wanted to explain where I identified with George before I flipped and actually said where I did. Because here's the thing, I actually identify the reason why I rolled my eyes so much about that Twitter thing is that there was a moment where I was like, yes, George, I'm on your side, and then I could flip and easily go, okay, Doug TeNapel, I'm on your side too. And that's what made this conversation weird, because just as much as it's important to not just dismiss an entire part of culture, okay, you can't just go, music is the Beatles because that's what I grew up with. What are you? We should have no one who's trying to make contemporary music that appeals to the youth of today. We should just make Beatles over and over and over again. That's not how you win anything, right? And so manga, anime, the MCU, these things are. It's important for if people on the right mean what they say in terms of winning culture. It's important for them to say we're going to make pop culture, and this is where I had a disagreement with Doug TeNapel, because Doug TeNapel said, "Oh, pop culture is not real." He was kind of drawing this line I didn't agree with regarding pop art versus real art, and I wanted to bring up the fact that most literary art is just the pop art plus time. All of Charles Dickens, his entire oeuvre is just it was just evening television of the day.
Shakespeare started out as vulgar theater.
It's exactly
Yeah.
it was the pits,
A lot
and
of
it
our
was
favorite stuff is pulps, which is the equivalent of pop, which is
exactly
magazines that went to people.
So drawing an arbitrary line between, that Pokemon, that's just stupid kid stuff. It's like, oh yeah, well, guess what was stupid kid stuff back, 100 years ago that we go, oh, we almost worship some of it, right? So I do have it. I had a point of disagreement there.
Most of our fairy tales were stupid kid stuff. They were literally told to kids.
Well, Tolkien, I was going to say Tolkien had a different opinion on that, but that's
Well,
a separate point.
I'm talking that in like a broader sense. Like it's actually very witty stuff for kids, but it was meant for kids. You dumb down a lot of it, and you kind of like slide the hidden meanings in there so kids kind of get it.
Tolkien would disagree with that.
Can I help out a little bit? Like, so we steel manned George. I just want to make sure we're steel manning Doug TeNapel here.
No, I'm about to do that. Okay, here's what Doug TeNapel is making a
help
very
me understand what art he does like. If you could, that would be a way to.
Let me steel man this a little bit here. Doug, there's spirits here. And again, I think part of the reason why this debate is so eye roll and cringe is the fact that the spirit of what both of these men are expressing is true. And maybe the words they're using to express it is just it's rage inducing. And I think that's why Reese left. And it is rage inducing. All right, here's the problem. Okay.
Yeah, they're not lying, but
George is saying you can't dismiss this stuff. Okay. Doug is, and that there's a spirit there that's like, so basically, if we think about the image and the spirit that's being reacted to, then George Alexopoulos is reacting to the spirit of the old crusty man, whoever he is. But we know these people are real because we've heard them. Okay, they are real people. Whether Doug is one or not is not the issue at this point. The point is the fact that there are these old crusty men, women, whatever, and they go, "Oh, that's a kiddie thing. You shouldn't have anything to do with that. You should feel ashamed of yourself for playing with that." And it's like, oh my gosh, you are making it not only are you trying to shame me for something I shouldn't be shamed for, you're making it harder for us to reach and make end roads into the culture war. So that's what Doug's culture. That's what George. That is the character of the person that George is reacting to, whether or not it is Doug or anyone else. Okay, but there is a spirit, there's a ghost that George is reacting to, and it's a real ghost because there are real people who channel that ghost. Now, here's the ghost. This is important because I'm going to flip the sides here. There is a ghost on the other side. Okay. And this is the ghost that Doug TeNapel is reacting against. And it's also a real ghost. It is the ghost of, can anyone pull up, so we can have something to look at. Can anyone pull up that clip of the guy who reacts to
the
Rise
of
Star Wars Rise of Skywalker, and he breaks into tears over it?
You mean Kevin Smith?
No. There was just this.
I know. I was
not a bad one.
Oh, okay, yeah. There's this fat soy boy cuck who just has like he cries.
Not only does he do that, he's cried for other things too. But give me a second.
Sure. He cries like you should cry over your firstborn child.
But also in context, what I said about Matt Walsh, he's a guy who does a reaction channel, so it's also theater. So
that's clearly it. All right,
Metal, this is a ghost. There's not a lot of flesh there. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Sure. So Metal, if you want to pull up that clip, this is the ghost that Doug TeNapel.
I actually don't know what clip you're talking about.
It's in private chat.
Oh, you have it in private chat. Okay, let me.
Yeah, I got it. Pop it up in private chat.
Does this have over 1 million views? I'm sure it does.
It
has 1.4.
Nice. Got paid handsomely for his tears.
Edming says Tolkien anti-articles are a pleasure to read. The old man anger was coming out strong and loud. Old man anger.
I agree with that because there's a lot of things I agree with Tolkien, but there's also a lot of places I disagree with him too.
Old man anger has a place. We need it. Reese, come back. An episode. We need Reese's old man anger back here. Take 5 minutes. Have a cup of coffee. Bring that old man anger back.
Yeah, I can't channel his anger.
No, I know. Like
I can channel his point somewhat, but
All right, here we go. This is what Doug TeNapel is very clearly reacting against. So if you want to just pull up, we're not going to watch the whole thing, but like if you want to skip ahead to like the part where he just
where would be it? Probably right here.
Right, yeah, yeah. I'm not getting any sound though.
I mean, you don't need sound.
I guess you don't need. I can actually. Yeah,
You don't even really need sound, but like it's.
I could feed it through my mic if you want the sound.
I'd like it because I don't know if he's crying because he loves it so much or hates that he thinks Star Wars is.
No, he
ruined.
loves it. He loves it.
These are tears of love.
Oh, this is just the trailer.
Yeah. Just
Yeah,
the
the
movie,
trailer.
the movie
The
had not even
announcement.
come out yet. It was just the announcement trailer.
We've passed on all we know.
It was a big deal at the time, as we all remember.
1,000 generations live in you now.
None of this happened in the movie.
But this is your fight.
All right, now the tears are welling up. It's literally sand. Just
It's coarse and it gets everywhere.
gets everywhere. A TIE fighter.
I know what that is.
Oh,
Yep,
what's our
member
girl?
berries.
No fucking way.
All right, you can pause it there. That's enough. I can only take so much of this.
Yeah, this guy looks like he's gonna die choking on his own saliva.
Though
And this is
I-
a bit.
I
This is all
gotta
a bit.
admit, yeah, it does seem kind of fake to me.
The tear. You look at his eyes. He's either making himself cry or it's genuine.
What
So,
you can do.
all right. All
Well,
right,
The thing is, like, I know people
we're
like
like-
this. I actually know real people like this.
Oh yeah, I don't
That-
doubt.
that's why I
I'm
like
saying
it.
this particularly does. seem-
because it doesn't matter. Actually, I'm glad you brought that up because it doesn't matter if he's being genuine or not. The ghost that I talked about, the character of someone who would be like that, is, as Metal just mentioned, that's a real type of person.
Yeah,
We know them.
it's-
It's not.
It's hyper real. Yeah,
It's a thing. So here's the thing.
yeah.
George Alexopoulos is saying, "Oh my gosh, that ghost of that crusty old man who just won't let me enjoy my toy, and B is making it harder for us to win this culture war. Would you please stop?" And then Doug and his side of the camp, Matt Walsh, I think, is part of this, is basically saying, "Oh my gosh, you children who will cry and weep like you should weep over your firstborn child, weeping over a shallow, vapid corporate product. Will you please stop it?" And so these are the two ghosts that are being. So when you look at the Twitter thread and you look at how, and so when people are, when they make their arguments, pay attention. If you've seen that Twitter thread, you'll notice that the arguments that Doug is making. I think he ended up making a comment once about how I don't know what that is because I've had sex and I have kids or something. He's clearly reacting against that ghost of that soy boy who is so worshiping corporate trash that he won't be a real
farming,
man. Right?
Or he's farming the cow as a troll.
No, that's it. No, that's
Yeah,
okay.
he's doing both.
That's
Yeah.
both are happening. But
He's tilting. He's
talking-
tilting against that windmill for
Correct.
cow.
Yeah, exactly. There's that. Larry's lair is there too, but I'm trying to
Yeah.
focus on
We won't go
the
there.
thing that is causing Reese, in my opinion, unless I'm wrong, but this is what I think is causing Reese to have such a rage out because
Well, and I definitely agree with this because even if these are all performers, they all have sway because they have hundreds of thousands of followers, if not some up to 1 million. And you're like, okay, well, their words are still going to matter to people, so we have to take the words at word value.
Okay, and that's a fair point as well. So the thing is that
people are like, can I just like reinforce this a little bit for Twitless goes forward? Like kayfabe is real. Kayfabe is hyper real, and people buy into it enormously, and they lose themselves into it because kayfabe is really important for society. Like it's how we like pantomime out like our most like fundamental like primal, like that's what's going on. Like these are really important forces at work, right? And we need these entertainers yelling at each other, and we need to buy into them, and we need to give them all our member berries and money.
This argument between them is a mythical situation happening in the modern.
Yeah, that's an
Mythical,
interesting point. I will say
absolutely.
this though, but it is,
Love
but here's where I'm going to channel Reese a little bit. The reason I was rolling my eyes so much is that the way this conversation is had is rage inducing because of the way this conversation is conducted. Now, I think Reese and I disagree on this point, because I found fault with how everyone was conducting this conversation, for pretty much, I think. And I think that Reese was finding more fault with one party or one side of it. So I think honestly, I think that's probably our biggest point of disagreement. But the way I saw it,
would his side be like he was kind of more upset at George?
I believe so.
Right? Yeah.
If I
Slash
may,
the Doug Ernst in this situation.
if I might add a little something here, I have found no shortage in my escapades online of things where I notice someone whose side I may 100% agree with and completely disagree against the other side. Yet the person I'm listening to or reading is not necessarily making a good argument nonetheless. People can be really bad about getting one-sided or making shallow arguments, even when I might agree with their overall ideas.
So run that by me again.
That I can find someone and be like, oh yeah, their side is 100% right. But I'm still cringing at
how they're arguing it.
Exactly.
Okay. So that's kind of I think that's kind of where I fell on this particular point, because I like I said, I nod in agreement when Doug brings up, oh my gosh, make something yourself, stop worshiping corporate slop. Okay, I'm like, you know what? Good point. When George says, hey, I like Pokemon, and you can't just dismiss what people like, or an anime, right? And you can't just dismiss this. Or we're not going to make any inroads into the culture war, and B, we're going to just dismiss some valid. A lot of us on this panel like manga and anime, you know. So dismissing it, I think, is I think it's wrong. I disagree with it.
I want to make a dangerous argument here. The problem ultimately comes down to representation. The point that the other side is making about representation is applicable here. People like Twitless, Matt, myself, Cartoonicus, and the Metal, we want to see ourselves represented in media, but we don't see ourselves as white people, Christian people, conservative people. We see ourselves as these other kinds of things. And the people who control the media, they see things through a Marxist materialist lens, where you're white, you're Christian, you're bourgeois, you're reactionary. So to them, we can't be represented because they don't see us. So they have, through their control and power of the media, in a certain sense, they've won their argument about the nature of the praxis of representation in the media by showing us a world where we're not represented.
I feel like that's getting a little aside from what George and Doug are fighting about. Like, I'm not saying you're wrong.
That's a cool episode unto itself.
I don't know. I kind of see, the thing is, as we've discussed in other streams, politics is in everything. And very often, especially online, I do see where, even if it has to be below the surface, I think everybody is always noticing when certain sides are known for thinking certain things and other certain sides are known for thinking other certain things. And we have a real tendency to immediately push back against, from one side to another with all those underlying ideas behind us. We're not just arguing one argument. We're actually arguing 50 arguments secretly.
Let me.
Those are called in rhetoric. In rhetoric, we call those warrants. Edming says, I want to acknowledge chat real fast.
Okay.
Edming says, is liking Golgo 13 a sin? Probably, but it doesn't stop it from being the most enjoyable manga out there. So here's before we. Sorry, I'm going to let you speak. Sorry, but I want to bring Reese back in here. So what I'd like to do in the next 2 to 3 minutes is bring this Twitter discussion to a close, and then we can go back to. And I think this was necessary. We did need to take an aside, have that little hash out conversation, because it is the reason why I think this conversation kind of came about. But then what we can do is start framing the conversation purely on the ideals and concepts, take it away from that Twitter argument, and I think Reese will rejoin us for that. So as long as we can get away from that rage-inducing
that's
part,
still a big maybe
of the argument, I think we can I think we can get him back. So let's
Sure.
try to wrap up. So Larry, you
So the
end
easy
cap
wrap
us
up
here.
is
Okay.
I'm going to use an example to my point. There was a time in which Glenn Beck had Coca-Cola advertising with him. There was a time in which Rush Limbaugh almost got an NFL franchise. We now live in a world where a random transgender TikToker almost had a major deal with Budweiser beer. That's what I mean by representation in media. George wants to see the world of himself represented where a guy like Glenn Beck could have a realistic shot at getting a Budweiser ad, where Rush Limbaugh could almost buy a hunk of the St. Louis Rams.
Well, to keep it more
He wants
relevant, he wants to see it. He wants to see the Daily Wire be able to make like an anime like that would compete or something of its ilk that would compete with like pop culture and be from a conservative point of view. That's what he wants.
Well,
it's he wants
that's what he
entertainment
wants.
from that. Yeah,
That's what he wants. But my problem, I would say to George, is I'm not a Christian, and I realized as we did this stream, I'm the only non-Christian here. But I would use this phrase as a meme. My brother in Christ, Daily Wire is never going to make a good anime because they don't have the necessary skill sets to make a good anime. They want to, but they don't know how. And they don't know how to ask the questions.
I think
George. So George is he negging Daily Wire into hiring like the SJWs of years previous? Is he saying you guys are all racist and sexist? You better hire me.
I mean, JDA tried to neg them and he gave up. And if JDA gave up on negging somebody, it's a hopeless case.
Yeah. Though he is famously ADD, but yeah.
I think George would settle for the less negging of anime because the poo-pooing does alienate people, and I think there's a valid point to make there to not.
No, I mean when we said negging, is he was negging Daily Wire, like saying, "Hey, you guys need to hire people like me to make good entertainment products to sell."
He's flirting with Daily Wire.
That's what we mean by negging. That's what we mean by negging.
I think he might be clout chasing, obviously, but I think that. Yeah. But George's point that I agree with is I think that some of the conservative gatekeepers, and they exist, I think some of the conservative gatekeepers should stop poo-pooing certain things so much. I think it does cause more division and is not helpful to the goals.
Would you put Doug Tenable in that?
Shadiversity actually came out on top because I talked about this on my show too when the arguments were newer, and he did the same thing I did, where he's like, no, maybe not all of this stuff is good, but I'm going to recommend you some that I think actually do have some virtue in it, so you can watch some good content. And he started recommending things like Rurouni Kenshin and things like that. Actually,
okay, cool, yeah.
I think Shad had like the best viewpoint.
I think Razorfist does that too. Razorfist does a great job of that. Razorfist does it with Bond Desine, which is excellent because there's so few people who are able to even know anything to recommend, and so he's able to say, hey, if you want some gothic horror, you should read this. So I think thank you, Larry, for bringing that part to a close. I think we can pivot, and so the rule now is the words George, Doug are now and Matt Walsh. I guess we have to keep Matt because but Matt Walsh, Doug, and George have now been excised from the vocabulary.
Yes,
we're going to keep it focused now entirely on the idea of childish things.
Wasn't there a fourth person?
Oh crap! It was Doug Tenable, Matt Walsh, George Alexopoulos.
Well,
and...
Doug Ernst came out on the side of George, but I don't know.
No, it was Geeks and Gamers. I can't believe you forgot. It was Geeks and Gamers. He's so.
Let's just put dumb Twitter drama on the shelf and focus back on the central point.
Okay, so because someone text Reese and tell him we've settled. As Matt Krotz likes to say, we squared the circle. What does that even mean?
So squaring the circle means several different things, and
we all intuit it, I would think.
There are very specific Freemasonic terminologies for squaring the circle.
Oh my goodness, am I being Masonic? Oh, how interesting.
Well, no, I think it's a term that Freemasonry adapted that fit into the pop culture during, ironically, the same time frame of Lewis that we're speaking of.
Oh, how fun! Yeah,
And
yeah.
I think
I just mean
the-
like acknowledging the paradox, I guess, and coming to terms with it, reconciling with the paradox, I guess, which itself is kind of Masonic, isn't it? Come on, Reese. We're kind of
those are all things that
we're
came from
filibuster.
Pythagoras. But I want to go back to the original point I had made earlier about Freud and how Lewis's comment on childish things could be viewed as selfishness versus selflessness,
Sure.
and about anxiety and how it is very pertinent, especially right now, as there are several online intellectuals who talk about how we're transitioning into an anxiety-based and anxiety-driven culture. So the childish thing is the things we're
Safety.
anxious about, the things we're fearful of, the things we run to safety from and run to safety to.
That's good.
Yeah, I do think there's a strong argument against escapism because things don't have to be escapism.
All right, so that's actually, I did some reading on that, and I have a defense of escapism, and I have it on multiple layers. So I want to have that conversation.
Well, I mean, an argument for it. I just think there's also a strong argument against it.
I mean, biologically, your body does escapism for between 4 and 8 hours every day.
True.
You need to escape your organic reality.
When you die, you escape your body.
I mean, isn't it as
I mean-
simple as just saying it's balanced like everything else? Too much of a good thing.
Yeah. Moderation
How do
is
we
virtue.
how do we have this conversation and make sure that we don't just have a more mature, more loving version of what George and Matt Walsh did?
That
Where
is
we-
what I've been worried
You know what
about
I mean?
ever since
Yeah.
Reese and Twitless was first talking about it.
Uh-huh.
I
Which can
was
happen.
thinking
There's
to
benefit in that, but we'd still be talking past each other.
Well, and I was thinking to myself the whole time, like, if we get angry because someone else is wrong, which is pretty much the problem with like all the politics,
Yeah.
that right there is breaking that. I mean, that is childish, right?
Yes.
That is not showing love at all. It's getting wrapped up more in the argument than in the ultimate goal.
The person behind it. Yeah.
Right.
That's a good. That's a
so-
good.
No,
good
don't worry
input
about me.
there.
I'm not swift to anger.
I mean,
Yeah, Meadow, I can't see you rage quitting.
I've gotten heated with Twitless before, but I respect Twitless's opinion, and when I've gotten heated at him, it wasn't personal.
Well,
We were both very emotionally invested.
Yeah, I remember that. I remember that argument. And
It's
it's
fun.
funny. Here's the cool part is that again, I went back when you have a really heated exchange, because when you're speaking, you're not as precise with your words, and so but later on you can kind of like refine your argument. And so I went back and I refined my argument that Larry pushed back on so hard on, and I think I've got a way stronger argument for what I wanted to say anyway. So I think in an intellectual exchange, as long as you're following certain ground rules,
Yeah.
I think it can be very
Nice.
fruitful. Because if everything's just like, well, that's a great point. Well, that's a great point. You don't ever get a really good exchange that makes you like good ideas should be able to be tested with heat. If you can't test an idea, if the idea can only hold water, if no heat is ever applied,
Oh, it's like martial arts.
it's a crappy
That's why
idea.
It's
It's
very
the
much
old-
like martial arts. If you aren't actually putting pressure into it, you can't even be what you're doing. It's like playing speed chess. Like a lot of people are good at chess if you give them like a week to figure out what their move is. But like if you only have a couple seconds, or you'll find out whether you're actually good at chess or not.
Is this true? Edming is Mad Love says Larry's argument with Twitless was about butts in one panel comics.
No,
No,
that's
that
a
was-
meme. No, our argument was
we
about.
we had an argument during the One More Day discussion. We both
Oh, that's
got
the one.
heated.
Oh, the one that got heated. But the one who got really heated.
I was going to bring that up.
Was you and me about Alan Moore.
Oh.
I said that Alan Moore was a utopian,
Oh yeah.
and I still actually kind of believe that. But I
I
need
agree with that.
Well, I needed to much better clarify and define what I meant by utopian, because it's not a typical That's a separate argument. Anyway, so it's a different thing.
Mm.
So we're gonna try and bring this
Yeah,
conversation around
Yeah,
to
let's do it.
childish things. Okay, so let's define a couple of terms here. We've looked at love. We've looked at some ideas. Let's go around the panel. What do you guys think a childish thing is? The type of childish thing that you would in fact say, okay, you need to outgrow that. I think that's an important, because I think it shows a lot about who you are and where your values are when you can say, okay, that's childish. You should outgrow that. So what's an example? What are your thoughts behind that? And what's
This
an
is gonna be
example of
good.
something that
I want to make sure I understand it. Right at the end, it sounded as if you're saying personally, like what's something I specifically need to
Yeah.
outgrow. Is that what you're saying?
No,
Well,
it's
how
something
do you
that.
define that?
How would you define it if you were to see it in someone else and say that's childish? You should outgrow that,
Because
because
I
that's
can't
essentially.
help thinking that might be a good way to look at it.
If we look at the what caused that whole Twitter debacle anyway, it's essentially this question, which is
Right.
That's childish. You should outgrow that. So what are your thoughts behind what that is? Metal. Let's start with you.
Focusing too hard on people's expectations of you.
That's deep. That's way deeper than I thought I was gonna go. All right.
When I read verses like that, that's the type of stuff that goes through my head.
Interesting.
You know, that's
All
what.
right.
It,
Well, let's
prompts
try
me
to in terms of culture, if there's like a cultural expression of it, what would you say?
Hmm.
We can pause and come back. Cartoonicus, you got something?
Well, it's hard for me to get away from directly connecting with what I think the biblical context is. There's a history lesson here, if I understand you correctly anyway. I believe that historians still cannot find a use of the word agape prior to the time of the apostles. It looks as if, in trying to introduce a brand new idea that had never existed in any one language before, they actually had to make up a word for it. And so that means the people he's speaking to when he's writing this, they all would have been new Christians, right? It's Corinthians, so in many ways he's getting on them for living lives that do not match up, of course, with their faith. And if that idea of agape is so completely new, right? He is hitting them with this bomb of things they're going to have to wrap their mind around for the first time. In this passage that is all about love, right in the smack in the middle, he throws this little line in here. To me, it feels like he is using the metaphor of, when I was literally a child, I put away things when I grew up, right? Because that's what we all do. We have to take responsibility. We have to learn how, to deal with stuff that we don't want to deal with, yada, yada, yada. To talk about how people need to live their spiritual lives. And he's giving us this brand new idea, right, that has never existed in history. It has never even existed in the Old Testament, at least not in the same way. He's showing them how to grow up as Christians specifically and go from just being, baby steps where I know the basics, I get what salvation is all about, I know who Jesus is, yada, 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 to can we grow to a much more spiritual maturity? And of course, what is the foundation of all of that? Well, what are we talking about this entire chapter? It's loving people first.
So if I could to circle back a little bit more to the topic, what would a childish thing be in culture that you would say, you know what, you need to outgrow that?
Well, if we go look at this culture he's writing to, one big thing, and in fact, I'm trying to remember if I go back to the previous chapter, I think there is a whole lot of infighting that's happening in the church at the time. And he's having to try to get them past that. And in fact, just before that, he's saying, you are all one body in Christ, right?
So kayfabing, essentially. I think.
I'm afraid I don't know that term.
Now,
It's play fighting, essentially. It's when you go, oh, I'm gonna take you down. It's basically
Well,
it's Twitter fights.
It's a little more
K-
than that, but
kayfabe's
yeah.
more than that.
Which-
Kayfabe's more than that.
Right.
It
which
comes
I was
from
gonna say
wrestling.
sounds like what we're talking about on Twitter here.
Oh,
Yeah,
it
Matt,
absolutely is.
He's
Well, no,
putting us on blast. What
kayfabe
we're gonna do.
Kayfabe is the heels and the baby faces back in the old days of wrestling couldn't be in the same car together. And
Even if
Hacksaw
they
Jim
got
Duggan,
along as a real
even if they
people,
got along,
they had to keep staying their character. They never dropped their character. They lived the character as long as they were in the public eye.
So on the internet, this obviously takes a very distinct flavor, right? And so you have people who are basically making drama with each other and having these big Twitter fights that aren't. In some cases, they're hyper real, but there's a degree of it that is very fake.
And we go.
And you don't know if something is work, if it's a shoot, or if it's a work shoot. And if you don't know what those terms mean, right? So work is the actual, like motion of things. It is the most tangibly real part. But then like a shoot is when like a character is doing something. But then if you have like a work shoot, it seems like somebody's breaking character to be real, but that's just as staged as any other part of the shoot.
But sometimes a work shoot is a shoot that gets worked.
Yeah, and it's not that there isn't reality
still
in
part
what
of the
they're
business.
saying, but it's the business speaking the reality as part of the business. It's almost like when you see like ironic meta humor, right? It has a very similar power
Sam
to
Hyde.
It. Yeah.
Sam Hyde, where
a lot of Sam Hyde stuff is
Sam Hyde's been being like a beast with the whole fish tank show where he got a whole house full of extremely socially awkward people and said, you're all staying together for 40 days to get a chance at $40,000.
So the thing with Sam Hyde, though, that makes him so kayfabe-ish is the fact that his, I think they call it post-ironic, I think is the technical term. But
I think that doesn't actually apply to him, but people use that term, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But the idea is the fact that the line between what he means in a genuine sense and what he's performing as a character and what he's just being a troll, like the lines are so blurry and overlap each other that you end up with this hyper real character. And it's a mixture of
unfortunate because it becomes very disingenuous at that point.
Well, that's the weird part because part of it is genuine, but you can never know what part is, and so it makes it very difficult. That's why he's very difficult to pin down, essentially.
And our culture is being driven by hyper reality as a vehicle to deploy authenticity to people.
Well,
right. I had a point earlier where it doesn't matter if it is kayfabe or not. You have to basically discern what points are worth tackling, and then you have to tackle the words as the words, right? I think that's the only thing you can do with anything in that kind of like kayfabe situation. You have to treat it like it's genuine, but then you have to discern. It's like, well, is this thing even worth engaging with in the first place?
Yeah. So I want to go next, talking about things that I think childish, especially in regards to culture. I think that. I think a chunk of it has to do with the individual and how he is responding to the media, how he responds to culture. So I'll try to be succinct, and then I'll expand on it for a second. So my succinct point is that I think that the line for childish and maturity, the thing that I would point and say that should be outgrown, I'd say it has to do with how someone processes the media and the culture that they are viewing. In most cases, I think there's probably some examples where it's like, wow, that is a very childish thing. I'm not super, there's certain lines where I'm like a boobah, where I'm like, oof, I don't know, man. If you're over infancy and you're still watching and enjoying Teletubbies, there's a conversation we should have.
And you don't have like a child that you're enjoying it through the child, like
right? Yeah. There's a certain level.
There's even it's only adults making Teletubbies.
But that's a fair point. So, but here's what I'll say. When we brought up the example the Looney Tune type guy who was weeping like you should weep over, being getting married or having your firstborn child. What we had is it's fine to watch Star Wars and say I like Star Wars. It's fine to really like Star Wars and to want to make something your own someday that's like it. It's fine to have an action figure of something that you like. That maybe you watch Star Wars when for me it's Godzilla.
Godzilla's great.
I have a 3 foot tall. My inner child wanted a 3 foot tall Godzilla from the 2014 show. My wife got it for me for my birthday. It was one of my favorite birthday presents I ever got. I recognize that there was a childish part of me that wanted that.
Hold up. Your wife getting it for you shows purity of your wife's love for you, so it's not childish.
She's fantastic. No, my desire for it, I recognize, was a little childish. But at the end of the day, I don't worship that toy, and I don't worship Godzilla, and I don't cry. My soul is not a slave. And I think this is why the word fan is so dangerous.
I think this was actually going back into what I was saying too, before I could come up with an example. Because one of the things I always harp on is the difference between a fan, which is short for fanatic, and I think a lot of us forget about that, versus an enthusiast, right? Because an enthusiast, you don't even know they're an enthusiast unless I bring it up to you. There's no like signs. It's like, oh yeah, I like the thing. But like a fan, there's an expectation that you have of a fan, right? You can kind of picture a fan of something before you even meet them. And part of it too is like fanatics are almost in like their own little tiny subculture, their little tiny sub-religion, like a cult when it comes to the stuff.
Exactly. If we're talking about fanaticism, and that's what the word fanatic comes from, and corporations, by the way, they love fanaticism, because if you will fanatically buy anything they put out, they can make a lot of money off of that. And so I worked for a company once, and they said that their goal was to create raving fans. And I think the word, in fact, they used was raving, because if you were raving about the brand, then you were going to give a lot of money to the brand.
That actually comes from a book I remember, which it was actually a really good business book. It was about showing how to do customer service. So I don't know if it doesn't necessarily mean that the company now was taking it the same way.
Sure, but the principle there is still, and to me, that is what I think when I think of something where I go, that is childish. It's not necessarily that it's Star Wars that's the problem.
Because you can see the same thing in sports.
Right.
Like Dave brings up like the Philly fanatic and stuff.
Yeah,
like
someone
that.
brought up like the people who especially in UK who throw riots when their team wins, and it's you destroyed half of your town.
Philadelphia, whether they win or lose, they're always throwing a riot.
Yeah, but I think the UK does it quite a bit too.
Now the funny thing about
legislation about it.
The funny thing about that, of course, is that they're not just rioting over their love of the game. There's a very personal thing in that, they are a nation and they are rioting or celebrating them coming together as a people and defeating the other guys.
So no, the thing that's in the UK, it's about their club. So it's actually about other parts of the UK versus other parts of the UK. It's not even national, like England versus France.
And you get the same
tribal,
but it's like a tribal ritual. If you
right.
The Chicago Cubs love Chicago, right? We are
so I don't know. I have a strong sensation we're not going to land this plane like at all. We're just going to fly it around in interesting locations, which is fine.
We've got this plane to a good place.
Matt, all right, so I'll finish my point.
I think we bombed the landing strip at this point.
So is the point to actually come up with a definition?
No, we don't have to. Yeah, but we're just like subdividing endlessly, which is interesting. I hope the chat enjoys this.
All right, well,
it seems like they're having their own combo.
Matt, take the control then. All right, so try to.
Well, I'm gonna try to help. I'm gonna try to service what you're going for. Like, I think the circle you're trying to square here is that both sides are arguing from consumerist assumptions, like buy the thing or don't buy the thing. And what you want to argue for, which I think is an insightful way to, like, a middle way through this, is instead of arguing about buy the thing or don't buy the thing, the solution can be like buy the thing for mature reasons or don't buy the thing for mature reasons. But like, and we've circled the plane over this many times, and this is also very valid. Like, but can you do that in a way that and still kayfabe it to get the algorithm on Twitter to get you attention, so that you can get you can get clout and shill your product when it comes out?
Corporations don't
That's really
Well, I
the
think
question.
not the kayfabe itself, but doing it for that algorithm is like making this as a business model, but wanting it for the attention is kind of a childish thing.
Well, yeah, and then a pox on all their houses in that respect, because they all want a lot of attention for this topic.
Well, and
Well,
of course
actually,
you can also
no, Matt, whoa, I gotta stop you there for a second, because what you just touched on, I think, is something super important.
Mm.
Attention-seeking behavior. Who do we associate that with?
Oh well,
Children.
mature people or
No, that was my thesis statement about how
Good
this is
point.
all connected to anxiety and
Mhm.
attachment, which is the
Oh,
state of
and
childishness.
I'll do you one
Freudian.
better.
It's a
I'll
great
do you
point.
one better here, which is the fact that as artists, this is where the complexity hits, right? Because art, in many ways, as those of us who make art know, art is in many ways I don't know if I'd call it a cry for attention. Sometimes it is, but it is a desire for attention. If
Yeah.
you make art and publish it, you desire attention. And so there is this kind of like
Yeah, 'cause
I
you
think
have to ask: is it art if nobody sees it?
correct. And I think there's people often
really.
often notice or they accuse, at least people often accuse artists of being childish. You're just seeking attention. It's like, well, that's what art is. It is a look at the thing I made, at the very least. So there's this maybe it's not so easily the plane's not so easily landed, because the
Yeah.
act of creation is an act of attention seeking on some level, and attention seeking is what children do. Why do babies cry? They want attention. Why do children misbehave? They often want attention. So
But to flip it around to be the loving person that Bible verse wants us to be, you do have to listen to the children, and you do have to really listen, not talk at them.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to them.
Was it Van Gogh said that art is practicing love. It's a rehearsal for love. That's what art is. Which I think is interesting, because that's a relational statement, isn't it?
Seven says I'm totally wrong. In essence, art is communication, not the wanting for a spotlight. I might counter that with the sense that when you wave, you're arguing, because every wave is at the bare minimum trying to prompt someone to wave back at you, and that is part of communication. It is an ask for, I'm going to put something into the ether, which is a type of communication, because I want a response back.
I can't help.
So, I don't know.
There's different types of, right? That's why we have like the word reply or retort, right? So there's like aggressive communication, there's retaliatory communication, and it doesn't always, no, you don't have to have ill will in it, but there's always some type of direction that in communication is coming from and an intent behind it.
Everybody wants to be heard, nobody wants to hear.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
No, that's not entirely true. Some communication is confirming that you heard.
So it seems like I think Twitless was making, like, I think he's really found like a really good target for this, which is like it's not about buying or not buying the thing. It's about why you're buying it, and you can have really mature or immature reasons for it.
I don't think buying or not buying was ever on the table. I think the argument that stimulated all of this, as well as stimulated Lewis's very eloquent response, was people who are using culture as a means of control and to limit people, which is
you don't think
ultimately a very
Doug
childish
was saying
Whoa,
like don't buy the thing?
Banned word.
No. And I'm saying that all of those people who are in that conversation that we're not talking about to not get Reese upset, we're all playing out this same trend that has been going on realistically since the 1600s with the Puritans, in one form or another in Anglo-American cultural discourse. As
So it's not-
opposed
okay, so
with the
it's not-
reformers, we're
it's not just-
the iconoclasts.
It's
Yeah.
not just definitely. It's not just about I think I think to say it's about control, I think is a bit reductive. And I'm not saying it's entirely wrong, because the result of what I'm about to say does result in some fashion of control, especially if you're coming at it from a sort of libertine-based perspective.
Twitless.
But-
I'm the Gen Xer on the show. I'm here to make arguments from
I
cynicism
bet,
whenever
I bet.
possible.
But let me say this. Let me say this though. So the part that is where I find the debate to be interesting is if we take it back to the like the masculine Christians and the Oxford
Actually,
Bootleg Christians.
They did a movie recently about the Jesus movement in California in the '60s, which is very on point with where
Oh,
you're
they
at.
did,
The one
yeah.
that Kelsey Grammer did. Did you see
Yes,
that?
I'm not.
Kelsey Grammer. Oh wow.
Yeah, he played the minister who founded the Jesus People movement.
But
that's
if we take it back to these different lines in the sand between that's mature and that's immature, that's childish, that's not childish, what you end up seeing is people talking about what they think, how they think people should act once they achieve, in this case, manhood, but we could also put womanhood in there as well. What are the acceptable behaviors? And when we start having that conversation, we start having a conversation about what we think and what our values are regarding the role of adult men and women in a particular vision of society. And I think that's a very important thing to recognize here, because if we were, as Larry earlier alluded to, if we think about those dirty commie Marxists, the dirty commie Marxist materialists that we mentioned earlier, their vision for what the roles of men and women in society, they just put they just dynamite the whole thing, right? Because what they end up doing is it's like, well, men and women's roles shouldn't. What's a man? They dynamite the whole thing. They blow it all up, and you end up.
They
with
do that. They do that to achieve the revolutionary end.
Exactly. No. Yeah, exactly. But in the Christian field, there are different philosophies on what that role should be. With the pull up your bootstraps Christians, there's the idea that to be a man's man, you should grow out that beard, and you should be working out, and you should be on your farm, and when you read, you should be reading your Bible. And that goes back to the Puritans to a bit, where it's like, if you're going to read a book, you should be reading your Bible, and that's basically what you should read.
Was it that, because you're the one who's done the most research of this panel on masculine Christianity, but I'm wondering, was it that performative in 100 years ago? With the Roosevelt generation doing this sort of thing. Was it that I almost want to say consumerist, you have to do these things, spend your money here and not there, or was it more qualitative back then?
I
don't know if I can answer that question.
I mean, there's a lot of this is the Protestant work ethic. A lot of it is very Weberian sociological frame.
I asked because I thought it might help because even Lewis is dealing with really interesting, much more subtle than any of those band people did, obviously, because he's coming from a modernist, but a hyper real consumerist world that we're living in.
So
go
ahead.
He's getting at qualitative stuff. He's squaring the circle, at least. It's one valid approach among many, but he's squaring the circle. And I think in Twitter, Twitless is going to go there. And I wanted to see if I could help by it, but I guess not.
So I will say that when it comes to the performative side, people like Charles Kingsley were, I think, pretty heavily performative.
Okay.
It was about being
good to know.
There were these now that he doesn't represent them all, right? But there were some of them that were it's all about Charles Kingsley talked a lot about masculine fluid, literally your manly fluids. It was he was really, and yes, and it went that far. It went into the sexual.
I mean, there's Dr. Kellogg, don't forget, in Battle Creek, Michigan.
Yeah.
And that's why we're all eating cornflakes.
But
Yeah.
so there were people who the performative was very important to be seen as. And you mentioned Roosevelt. Roosevelt was all about the performative.
That's true.
I need to be on, not just as I'm going to bring along journalists as I charge up the hill in the Spanish American War. And and I'm going to make this a legend because I'm going to make it a performance. I'm going to go on foot. I'm going to go on the teddy bear.
So we can't just blame the internet for this. Like this is a this is a
No,
this is a
this is how people
chronic
have always
American
been.
illness.
Oh yeah.
I wouldn't
And-
even say American. It's pre-American. Like if you go all the way back to Macedon, right? Alexander the Great was living a narrative, like outright. He basically admitted it. Like he would sack people he wasn't going to sack otherwise because they refused to engage in combat and live up to the narrative he was trying to live because he wanted to be a mythical figure. Like this has just been in human nature for a really long time.
Well, and I think this is something that Reese really wanted to bring up. I figure it has to be, or otherwise he wouldn't have been using the Lewis line. Is that there is a very easily found egotism in the desire to be thought of as an adult, right? Like you can literally calling something childish is literally an insult in our world, right? But is the obsession with how you are seen and all that not actually the childish thing itself?
Well, obsession with how you're seen is insecurity, ultimately.
So it can be. I think I agree / disagree with Lewis, I guess, in that sense. I think he's right. He actually channels this a lot in The Last Battle with Susan, because Susan is the one who basically outgrew Narnia. And she says, oh, you and your silly childish games. And the allegory that's happening there is this woman who has outgrown religion. And that is a very common thread you will see about people who talk about leaving the faith. They will say, I outgrew it. I became an adult. Having a faith like a child in Sky Father Man is in fact the childish thing that you're supposed to outgrow. It's like believing in Santa Claus. And Lewis is kind of, playing with that. He's actually subverting it, which is kind of clever how he subverts the kind of he subverts the atheists, which is what a wonderful thing that he does. But in The Last Battle and in Narnia at several points, he turns that idea upside down, which is, you adult person, I think he does it in Magician's Nephew too, but you adult person who think you're above the faith of a child, the belief in something much greater than yourself,
Right.
Things that are beyond your understanding. And kind of like going back to that verse, I see through a glass darkly. The more mature thing to do is to understand that you won't understand, and that there are things beyond you. And that's the kind of thing where he's falling on it. And I think I'm with him there.
You actually just brought something up to my mind, Twitless, of how they deconstructed Wendy, who was originally a character who exists to show the Lost Boys, saying, hey, being an adult isn't all bad. There are positive things. And you can bring in these loving, pure, childish things into the world of being an adult. And now Wendy's a girl boss who slays Queen.
Gosh.
And doesn't take anything from any man.
So I think
extremely childish.
I think, and perhaps this might have been, I think, Reese's larger point. So I really wish he was here for this. Cause I think I'm coming around to, I think, some of what he was, I think, trying to get at, which is, it's a false dichotomy, right? The idea isn't to just, and I'll use your example there, Larry. If we think about Wendy and Peter, the idea isn't to just go, oh, Lewis is not advocating for people to stay Peter Pan. I know Tolkien didn't, and I'm pretty sure Lewis would not have advocated for that either. And the answer to Peter Pan isn't to just simply become this person who no longer believes in the supernatural, who no longer has an interest in those things, who becomes a man a mind of wheels. which I know for Tolkien especially was very, very negative. And I'm pretty sure, pretty damning. Yeah. And I don't think Lewis, I'm less familiar with Lewis on this point, but I don't think Lewis was a big fan of the people whose minds were made of wheels and gears. So, and the idea isn't necessarily to just strike a balance between the two, but I think the idea is that
is the movie Hook.
Yeah, actually, unironically, you're advocating for the movie Hook, but let's...
that might be it. So
he had to learn to be a child again, but then that overcorrected to the other side, and then he had to like, no, you need these things, but you need them so you can be a dad.
Well, it's a like this
that
is where
was
like
Reese's point. That was I know that's exactly Reese's point. Because I think I saw him say something like that. So that is his point.
Yeah, he's going there. Like he's thinking about like the Overton window in a way. Like sometimes you have to nudge things in one direction in one generation, and sometimes you have to nudge them in a different direction in a later generation. And and pitting those like someone's statements from the mid 50s against what people are saying on Twitter in 2023 like isn't you got to see what they're tilting against in their own contemporary settings, you know. And I think I like to think I'm pretty sure Matt, like everybody here is aware of that with Lewis. That's a different context, you know.
Right.
I think honestly you'd have more positive things to say about Peter Pan, like you know, than we would do today, because now we're coming with the baggage of man children living in their, you know, in their mother's basements and all this kind of stuff.
The argument about man children is a bad faith argument made by people who are thinking childishly. They're willing to be critical of people who are unable to break free of themselves in this economy and in this alienating society devoid of meaning, as opposed to offering them a hand up in love, as Christ would recommend in the Bible, and as God would recommend in the Torah.
Wow.
So one thing I do want to bring up that I think puts another spin on this, which is the anime manga side to it, because Matt Krotz brought up the fact that the windmills we tilt at in the 1950s are not the windmills we tilt at today. Today, the conversation is these conversations often emerge when we talk about video games and manga and anime, and all three of those things have a common root in many instances that I think is worthy of discussing. And I don't want to open the can of worms too large here, but Japan, for want of a better word, Japanese culture, and some of the reaction that we see, I think, is a reaction against a culture that is very alien, and a culture that has chosen to represent its fiction through childish appearance. The anime figure, even the anime man, the Bishonen, or I think is the term.
Bishonen is not the anime man.
It's
that means
the pretty anime man.
That's what I'm talking about, is the fact that even the most masculine figure is going to look like a Bishonen to a guy who grew up with, his Old West stories and the Lone Ranger.
There's a broad expression of manhood in anime and manga, Bishonen being just one slice.
I know.
He's saying that how they see Bishonen is how a lot of Westerns are going to even see the most manly.
That's the point I'm making. The point I'm making is that if you look at the scale of what art looks like, the choice that anime and manga largely takes. I am not, like I said,
you're not getting a lot of Hokuto no Ken.
Most of it looks, like I said, it looks like, and this is something that often gets criticized and then put into this conversation. So it's important to bring this up.
People are directly addressing that specifically.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah.
I'll bring up one who wasn't banned today. I know Ethan Van Sciver. I always roll my eyes when he goes, I looked at Common America, and that's just for girls. And it's like, oh my gosh.
I mean, that's kayfabe though.
What a boomer take.
I mean, that's kayfabe for me.
But again, like we said before, these hyper real takes you have to take as real. Like you have to argue against it because people see it, and
I mean,
most people, random people, don't know it's because of drama between people.
If you're gonna make
or
a cringe
acting
take
up or anything.
If you're gonna make a cringe take, I get to make a cringe response. You can't go, oh, I was just making a cringe take. You can't
especially on the internet.
Yeah, exactly.
Most people don't know the context to anything. They don't know the history of something. They just see a random take.
So
I actually found out
your followers.
Context about Ethan's first wife that I didn't know now, which recontextualized everything I know about Ethan.
But the point here is the fact that a lot of people who react and make these claims about childish, not childish, man, child, they do surround the anime aesthetic, is what I'll call it. And they literally say, like I said, I've seen that. Like, I know this is real. I know there are people who
probably
really
not a
believe
coincidence.
this.
Yeah.
Yeah, they look at it and they say that's a kid, that's for kids, and that everything that's drawn. Look at those big, beautiful Disney eyes. And that's I can't tell the difference between the men and the women, and it's just it's a pure and it doesn't just apply to manga and anime. A lot of video games have this aesthetic as well, and so a lot of this can be tied back to this concept.
But you know who else has this kind of aesthetic? Tolkien, an aesthetic of beauty, an aesthetic of truth, an aesthetic of good and evil.
Wait,
there is a
point.
distinction.
There's a big distinction between.
No, just hold up. I'm not saying Tolkien is anime. I'm saying the thing.
Though I would totally watch a Tolkien.
Yeah, no, let them cook. This is interesting.
Absolutely. The things that people like in anime and manga are the same sorts of things they like in Tolkien, and they are childish in the sense that the narratives are simple, but the simpler narratives about a world where there are good people and bad people, where there are bad people who do bad things and good people who do good things, and the good people fight the bad people, those are actually mature narratives for discussion and for exploration.
And honor, culture, all that stuff.
Versus everything is a shade of gray. There's all this moral nuance, and everything is just a muck and drag.
Yeah, no room for personal sacrifice. Yeah.
There's also a big thing about the depiction of men in manga that we have to think, because there are some like very heavily cartoon stuff that's pretty common. But you also
Metal,
further back you go.
As you say that, Metal, pull up Seven's comment, because
Seven's
coming from
his poor chat.
Yeah.
So Seven.
One of the things about this too, right, is the further back you go, the more masculine things you see in manga. And part of it too is we're looking at a society where a lot of their depictions of men are also reflected on how men look in the society. I don't know if you've met many Japanese men. They're not particularly big or muscular or anything. Many of them, their frames aren't that much different than many of the women in their society. This is just actually how their physical structure is. There are a lot, but they're fewer and farther in between than they used to be.
So thank you, Seven. Thank you, Seven, for perfectly representing the viewpoint that I'm describing.
But let me use this as let me
but
use
like
a
sumo wrestler is masculine in
Japanese.
Japanese.
Let me use a counterexample to prove my point. Grappler Baki. It's all about muscular dudes fighting and punching each other, right? But it's also about a son coming to terms with his father, who's still trying to come to terms with his father. It's got a whole Oedipal thing, and Baki comes to an ultimate solution where his father finally sees that he has become the man to surpass him, which is what struggle we're all going.
That's well
but
and
that's
good.
Not the aesthetic, is what
that's what I'm talking about, which I think is germane to this conversation.
Though,
because we could spend half a day.
Just bear with me, because it is coming as a immature shonen. Everybody's fighting. Everybody's going through a tournament. Childish aspect. You're able to tell a mature story about manhood, about father.
But it's still that's still one story. I'm talking about an entire aesthetic, and
I could go through tons of examples. We could do an entire show.
No, I know, but that doesn't help.
Well,
us
no,
address...
actually, I do have the counterpoint here too, right? right?
Okay,
No, because I think this
No,
agrees.
no.
with it.
Everybody's doing counterpoints. Can we let's help Twitter
Well, I wouldn't
and
even say this
Twitless.
like
Twitter.
counterpoint. I'm actually agreeing with Twitless here. And
We
I'm going to
definitely
explain
need to
why I
help
agree
Twitter.
with him. Right? It's not even so much of a counterpoint.
No
Let me
one can
explain
help
why I
Twitter.
agree with Twitless. Part of it because there are a lot of like say martial arts manga and stuff like that do actually have like very masculine men. You don't see them though. And one of the reasons you don't see them is it's not just that it's the only pervasive type of comic you see coming out of Japan. It's the type that sells here is that stuff that has the effeminate image, right?
Mhm.
So this actually does bring to your point. If there's a childish thing, the stuff that sells here are the childish things.
I would even bring up,
And what's and then what people are tilting against are those popular, shoujo type content. Like
But
that's
my
the
argument-
meme in America.
But my argument is that those are the only things that we're able to tell a adult story with, because adult aesthetic things are all caught up in the meaninglessness of adult existence, and they don't have an answer.
okay,
Interesting.
so
for
that,
the
that
nihilist
point. All right,
question.
so that's a point that I kind of
Very
I,
interesting.
that's a point that I like because it's it's
Mhm.
not. I kind of see where you're going now. But
That's cool.
to go a little further with this other side of things that Seven, like I said, is channeling here. The anime aesthetic of man is unnervingly effeminate to me. I'd be willing to bet it has contributed to the emasculation of a generation. So what Seven, the viewpoint that Seven is expressing here, I'm not going to speak for Seven. I'm just going to say that viewpoint that I see is the ghost, as it were, that is being the windmill or ghost that is being tilted at by a lot of people who say,
And I agree. I just think it's backwards. I
see,
think we were already
had-
getting emasculated, and that's
had
why it's popular.
had I known that this conversation was going to go here, there's actually something in the Talmud specifically about this, and how the ghost of these people who've been emasculated by this stuff, they're not emasculated by the cartoonishness of the media. They're emasculated by childish men saying to them, well, this is kid stuff, grow up. And so they feel that they're abandoned and isolated from society.
I want to push back a little bit
That's
because
cool.
I actually identify a little with Seven occasionally, because there are manga that I do enjoy where I go, does that male character need to be portrayed that womanly? And when he said unnerved, that's a very good way of expressing what. Now, the more manga I've read, the more inured I've become to it, and there's a certain point where I become so inured where I barely recognize it. And I think that's another important point to bring up, because when you have someone who is not inured to it, who just sees it and goes, "Ew, that looks really gay,"
They
and
still
it's
get
like
shocked by it,
Like I the last time I noticed JoJo, like I enjoyed me some JoJo, but there's
it's a little sussy,
yeah.
I mean,
Well,
it's a
JoJo
bit-
specifically, that's a very specific case about somebody who's
JoJo's very weird.
very into expressionist art and like Italian fashion.
Body
I know,
culture and stuff like that.
I know, but
yeah,
it
it's
doesn't
gonna
matter.
be very
we
gay.
we don't
It
have
doesn't
to
matter.
we don't
It's
have to
still-
footnote everything.
Yeah, it doesn't.
we know.
It doesn't matter that's the case.
Wait.
Hey, Reese.
Pablo's come back.
All right.
Oh,
Pop-
his computer's actually been in the background for a long time. I just wasn't
Yeah.
Oh, I
going to
know
call
he's
notice to it.
listening.
Yeah, no, I was talking to somebody, and I started to call him after because I needed to talk. I didn't think it would take this long, so when I got the text that you guys were just about finished, I went ahead. I was going to come back in right quick, but then we talked for like another 15 minutes. So, so sorry to keep you on forever. I hope you guys have enjoyed the conversation.
This has been a good conversation.
Good.
It
And
has
you
probably
have
been the most in-depth and most variety conversation I have
I mean,
seen.
we brought in Umberto Eco, we brought in Freud, we did a deep dive on the Bible, we talked about the history of Puritanism.
So you're
we
right.
talked about
We went
professional
every
wrestling.
weed. No weed got
And we almost saved anime. Almost.
I mean, we could come back and try to save anime.
Well, it's simple. It's,
we were
it's
about
simple.
there.
It's not about the medium. It's about what you do with it.
That was my
Thank
point. I made
you.
that point.
was-
I made that
That
point.
was Twitter's point, and I was helping him get there the whole time. Kumbaya.
Waffles and beer. That's awesome. So, Edming, I think, got here after I had to leave because I was not in a state to be rational. And I was gonna do this off air, but what the hell, guys? I'm sorry. I was out
No.
of line. So
So you
was
know
entirely-
your limits. Like, just do what you got to do, man.
I was entirely out of line, and
Love you either way.
You guys,
Yeah.
the fans at home, people tuning in later, didn't deserve. Well, most people didn't deserve. I'm sure there's somebody out there who had it coming, but it wasn't even y'all.
It was me. I had it coming.
So.
No, because like I said, Twitless just missed you. This is the most heated anything I've gotten since you were gone. The most between that was us just criticizing Cartoonist's take on what type of cheese he puts on pizza.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
nothing.
I did hear about
Nothing.
that. That was
He-
something. I will say,
Cartoonist also has a
Was
weird
that really
take
worse
on
than
the
One More Day?
Incredibles.
I will
Yes.
say, I was here for one more day. But I will say, when it comes to American cheese on pizza, a Philly cheesesteak pizza is pretty damn good. But that's the only exception.
Mm.
Wow. That's
So okay,
Philly
so
cheesesteak pizzas I have are very different. They use like more of a ricotta cheese.
That's probably true. I mean, there's
Oh,
not
Reese,
only
before-
one way. I mean, if Dave was still with us, I don't know if he dipped out earlier, but
Yeah.
if Dave was still with us, he could tell us if there's more than one kind of way to cheese up a Philly cheesesteak, because he's in the Philly area.
Reese, I
I
want,
just had a Philly
I want
cheesesteak.
your opinion on this.
Okay.
It has to do with anime and manga,
Okay.
which often in debates that we were kind of talking about gets thrown in there and said that's childish. And we were talking about the fact that a lot of manga and anime, to an outsider especially, we had people in chat who even mentioned this, who said they were unnerved by how girly the men look and thought that it led to the emasculation and infantilization of men. And there's something about that, especially if you're not inured to it by reading a lot of it. You're an outsider, you see this girly boy and you go, ew, that's for children, that's for babies. So like, what are your, how do you weigh in on,
I think that's a silly
navigating
argument. I think that's a silly argument. But I understand it on the one hand, because I've heard it before, but not about anime. Like, okay, so a buddy of mine, Matt Johnson, who I've had on the show before, he lives out in Omaha. And he had for years done a cutesy drawn comic that was sort of an office politics that was also like a mid-level sci-fi fantasy, right? Not like low sci-fi, but not high, not like low fantasy, not high fantasy, somewhere in the middle, called Cortland. And it would have one storyline that happened as office politics, and then the next storyline they'd all be like the main character would be trapped on the internet fighting against monsters. It was amazing. I love it. But he
Sounds
did this. He did this cutesy 3 apple high style drawing. It was he got it from a Dick Blick book or something, I think he said back in the day. And it was one of those, it was like a standard 70s cartoony kind of look, right? So all of his characters were 3 heads tall, and they had really big heads and kind of tiny bodies and that whole thing. And somebody did a negative review back in the day, because all of his characters are supposed to be adults. They're working their jobs, they're paying bills, they're dealing with bosses, all this kind of stuff. They're all adults. But the reviewer was like, they all look like children, and that's unnatural. And I was just like, it's just an art style, man. I mean, nobody. I mean, Garfield looks like a cartoon cat, but he, eats lasagna. That's not normal either. So,
Sure.
it's a comic.
But to take it to
down.
anime and manga specifically, because there are people who do go, ugh. And I myself, even though I like manga, I've picked a couple up and gone, that guy, that looks really gay. You know what I mean? Like, and you're like, that boy, that man.
Sometimes it is.
That comes from
Fair.
their perspective on beauty, which is similar but different than the Aristotelian concept of beauty, which runs as a through line from modernist into postmodernist art.
The Victorians had it with the dandy versus again.
Honestly, I've picked up some really old X-Men and found some scenes. I'm like, that's pretty gay.
Yeah, for sure.
No, but you know what I'm talking about.
What I'm saying is that sort of more effeminate, stylized, masculine figure in their art comes out of their tradition of artistic beauty.
I see why certain men who are being masculine men see that aesthetic and react negatively to it.
Yeah, Twitless is trying to explain a phenomenon in the West of how we are looking across the Pacific at what Japan's doing.
Right.
And
there-
what Japan is doing is a very different topic. But
Right.
what Americans perceive Japan doing,
Mhm.
there's different. Like all of us are Americans, and clearly there's different views on it. But there
Well, and
there is like a pop, like there is a meme version of you know being
Right.
very negative about anime.
And what if I could
that's
just say real fast, what I want to say is the fact that the concerns that some of these people have when they say that's childish, that's not masculine, I think that what they're coming from isn't just something to be dismissed. I think it's something to be conversed with. I'm not saying they're right, and I'm not saying they're 100% wrong, but like but there's a
I
part
agree
of
with
me
that. Yeah.
there's a part of me that resonates a little bit when they go, oh, look at that.
Right, I
In
mean-
some examples. So how do you navigate that?
So I think the one thing is that my biggest
Good question.
problem with the debate as it sat in the last 2 weeks, at least as I saw it, beginning like 3 weeks ago and then today, because I was off Twitter for a good chunk of time.
Okay.
But the debate as I saw it was that it wasn't that people were saying this medium is inherently childish. It is this medium, isn't a lifestyle. It isn't life.
It's about
and then
failing as an
somebody,
adult.
then other were saying, well, you're saying that I'm not living a life. Well, maybe if you're spending all of your day playing Grand Theft Auto, then maybe you're not all day, every day. Not like, hey, it's a Saturday. I've been, at the office all week long. I had, church on Wednesday. My lawn's taken care of. My kids are all over the in-laws. I'm going to spend a day playing Fallout. This comes back to like personal story. I'm going to back up on this a little bit because this is something I meant to bring up. And I've talked about this before. I love to garden. I love to, I've got a home. I before I decided I wanted to go back to school, I tried to keep up on maintaining the house and painting it and fixing it and all that kind of stuff. But a few years ago, and then winter, you don't do that stuff because winter is winter. Well, a few years ago, I started playing Fallout 4 in the winter, and I love that game, and I love so much things about that. You can build these villages, you can lay out a civilization, you can enact justice, you can enact commerce. It's great. And so I one day, and as winter rolled on into spring, one day it's Saturday and it's 10 o'clock in the morning, and I'm picking my plants in my fictional garden in one of my settlements, and I said to myself, wait, I should be working in my actual garden. I have a pile of bramble that's supposed to be a garden in my backyard, and I'm harvesting fake plants. And I put the game away, and I went out and I didn't touch it again for like 9 months because I have problems. If I'm when it comes to video games, I either do them or I don't. And so
that's like that's what's been really interesting is we were chatting about that for the last hour now, and it's really kind of cool that we kind of came to that conclusion too.
Yeah, and so
it's not about doing the thing or not, or like consume the product or not consume the product. Both sides of that of that false dichotomy is assuming it's adopting the consumerist mindset, and you're saying rise above that and say, how can I use or not use this maturely?
Right. And it's
that's the way forward.
It's like one of the things I put on Twitter today is that hero stories are supposed to teach you to be heroic, right? Mm-hmm. Sports are supposed to teach you how to work as part of a community. They're not supposed to be the thing that defines your life, right?
Wow.
Your life is defined by your duties and the people that you have those duties to. And if anything is getting in the way of you being a good husband, being a good father, being a good neighbor, being a good citizen, being a good Christian or whatever your faith thing is, if the things you're doing for fun are keeping you from excelling as a person, and side note, I do think Jesus is the only way, but if anything you're doing is keeping you from being the person you ought to be, then that it's not the thing that's the problem, it's how you are treating it. And that's alcohol. And I mean, way earlier in the chat, Marmaduke brought that up, that the alcohol is the exact same situation, where if it's not the booze that's the problem, is it stopping you from being noble-minded? Is it stopping you from being present with the family where you're at? That's the problem. Is it's not the thing, it's how you the frail, weak, pitiful little person, how are you dealing with the issue that you have there?
But how do you build like a meme addicted, like hero starved fan base who loves goosing your algorithm day in and day out? Like if you're going to take that kind of high middle road, like how do you?
I think that's why I podcast out of broadcast once a week out of a basement in Nebraska.
I mean,
I
how
was
many?
gonna say,
times
there's one thing I know about Reese.
There are very few dopamine hits here.
Mhm.
I was gonna say, one thing I know about Reese is that I don't know if he's capable of arguing in a disingenuous way, even as a joke.
Mhm.
And I think that's what's led to you getting frustrated at times. If I can go so far, I'm not going to speak for you. But there are clearly a lot of people on the internet who do not have this problem.
And sadly, those people are more successful.
That's been the
than we
internet
are.
forever.
And yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
As Larry said, they and as
Well-
Matt C just said, they use this as the capital to trade on to advance their careers.
You also take that.
That is the message.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's part of the thing that I find so frustrating. Because largely, I mean, depending on what you're doing, right? If your art is political commentary, then by all means, this falls into political commentary, and that's sort of your thing. If your art is music, movies, books, right? Then getting involved in spats is really detrimental to it. And I mean, here I am, right? I had to leave.
That was my meme with person who will not be named like
I
2
had to
months
leave
ago.
my own show because I was so worked up about all of this.
If I may, also that side of you that is incapable of being disingenuous in an argument, you add to that Twitless's ability to immediately experiment with playing devil's advocate.
Well,
that is a volatile combination.
That's actually one of the things I really appreciate about both Twitless and Matt is that they are excellent at playing devil's advocate, at bringing out those questions. And what I appreciate about that, when I can control my faculties, is that it allows it that kind of it forces a person to double down. Not necessarily double down, but to reinforce and to be able to back up what you're saying.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate being able to have people that I can push against, to understand that I need to push against people.
Your arguments get better. My arguments have when people have pushed me the most, I ended up articulating my argument better. I think someone pushed against me once in a classroom, and she pushed hard, and I ended up taking a second. And I thought about my point. I rephrased it, and then I thanked her later and said, "Thank you for pushing me to say this better," because my argument was way stronger when I was able to reformulate it after being challenged on it. So that's a valuable thing.
And one of the things I had to do tonight is I needed to, and I'm kind of glad you guys are still here. But I had to separate my personal self from the argument self, because that's one of the things that's why I knew I was letting my personal frustration affect my ability to be cogent.
And that's in a lot of ways that's a strength of yours, Matt, and in a lot of ways maybe that's something we're kind of addressing that might not be a strength of a lot of people who do this very well online. Is I like okay, can I just break the rule once, and I'll say it with someone who isn't personally associated with these circles? With Matt Walsh, he will say like you guys should be paying. Well, actually, other people too have said this who are associated with these circles. But they'll say things like, "Well, you guys should pay me for giving you guys free content." Like I just kind of. I say these things like they drop kayfabe sometimes to let you know that they don't take it personally, and maybe they even should, but they've just kind of said, you know what, I bet I could go viral today if I say this, and 9 times out of 10 at this point they figured out how to do that, which is kind of sad.
And that's part of when you're in the commentariat, that's part of your job is riding the algorithm. So like
it is.
I mean. and
Yeah,
that's
no one forced them. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, and if you know what the jokes are, then it's
Mhm.
hilarious.
So as I ended up rolling my eyes at a chunk
Well,
of it, but
that's fine. That's a perfectly valid.
I was just
response.
laughing
I mean,
the entire time at everyone involved.
as a dad,
I hope they all made some money off this.
yeah, I don't.
Yeah, I
some of
can't.
I- I'm-
I know they all did. I know they all did, but I hope some of them didn't. That
Well, that's
not
what
all of them, but some of them. Anyway,
Church of Failure is saying, oh, I love this one. The example of I like pancakes is basically a backdoor to so you hate waffles.
yeah,
That is
Yeah.
a classic
Yeah.
Twitter
and,
meme.
and
Yeah.
I tell you
Great.
right now that type of disingenuous argument, that's the thing that just makes me I want to punch people over that kind of crap.
That is my
I want
sign
to
meme
spend
Twitter.
the money to buy a plane ticket to show up at somebody's door and just
Wait, so you know better. Like, you were the first person to say you can identify where the shock jocks are and where the infotainment
Yeah.
people are in this scene, and
Maybe
you have. I think you've done it accurately, and you're the first person to get really annoyed when there's just like disingenuous statements going on. Like, how could you? How you're a paradox,
Okay.
that like shock jocks, all they do is just disingenuous statements.
I mean, Doug
Okay,
being so
so-
successful as a shock jock is keeping Doug from finishing his work as an artist.
well, no, I mean, Doug.
Oh,
I mean,
abandoning his work almost.
it's more than that, because like Doug's work is more, and this is, you can call me a fanboy if you want, but Doug's work has always been more than just one thing. And right now, this phase in his life, he's doing one thing that takes enough of a time commitment. That
Yes,
he can't do
arguing online. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
For money.
and the YouTube commentary and all that kind of stuff. I
Yeah.
mean, it's
For
news
money,
as
yeah.
entertainment, and
Well,
that's,
he's doing
he's done that for a long time.
To be fair, he is do current to give him credit
Mhm.
where credit's due in this case. He's not just doing that. I believe he is
Yeah.
developing a series with
Nurkish.
what's his face, Nurkish.
Yep.
Which
Yeah.
like I okay, but like it's you can't say he's not doing art if he's in fact doing animation is the hardest art. So you know.
Yeah. I can't.
And it's not just
Yeah.
the two of them. They've got a small team put together for it. And it's,
Okay,
it's-
all right.
I
all right.
can't snub that. Yeah.
That's the whole thing. But I mean, it's like, the work we
Works on
want.
Twitter every day. I will make fun of that. Like,
Yeah, but I mean,
unreservedly.
and it's like Matt. I mean, I know the work we would rather see, and probably maybe everybody in the room would rather see
Another
Doug
comic?
do is more comics.
Yeah.
For the love of God, more comics.
I
But
was gonna say I'm always gonna say one more.
I'm not. He's
Well-
not his boss. He does what he wants.
Edmund
right?
has a question that I wanted to clarify on. He says, "Who made money off of what?" I'm out of the loop. Quick recap. I think
Oh
we're
my
speaking
God.
more. We're speaking more broadly.
The
We're not going to go
intention,
down the rabbit trail. But speaking more
marketplace.
broadly, the
Yeah.
people who
If you really want to try to figure out the pieces, go back to where just before I left, and then like do some Twitter searches in the last 2 weeks, and you'll be able to figure it out.
I'll just speak broadly. I think part of the
Okay.
concept is the people, the Twitterati, as it were, the people who who are having these debates understand that they get clicks, and clicks is money for them when they get into these fights.
Yeah.
So that's what we were that's what we were referring to.
And
Yeah.
people like Matt Walsh have people who maximize his intelligence of his statements to maximize people's anger.
Yeah.
What
One of these
annoys-
days, I hope, like, I'd love to see a chat. I've never seen it happen, but we always get to this point where we finally acknowledge what the water is that all these fish are swimming in, instead of describing each other's fish and like which team we're on. Like, now we're at the point where we know what the water is. Sorry, I'm doing this elaborate metaphor thing that
That's
Matt,
okay.
he always does.
I'm
But, like,
familiar with the metaphor. We talked
It'd
about
be
that.
cool to
this week.
start the convo with what the water is. Like, what is algorithm chasing? Like, what does it do to these kind of conversations? Like, can we all we can say like nothing is real and everything's hyper real in this world, that this cultural authenticity ecosystem that everybody's exchanging things on. Like, we didn't just have a voice call and have this conversation. We're doing this on a live stream.
Mhm.
So we're engaged. We're actually producing in this ecosystem too. We're not just consuming. What
See,
is
I
that
didn't realize
about,
this
and
was
how
all
does that
about
affect us?
So
I
if
didn't
may,
realize this
though,
was all about that thing. I was just thought we were just talking about
Yeah.
like a cool meme from C.S. Lewis and gonna go and do a deep dive on that. I didn't realize we were gonna
Yeah.
talk about how the internet is full of snakes.
Well,
I don't think we were.
I didn't
because
want to. I just wanted
No.
to talk about
That was
the-
my
Matt
fault.
even started this too. He's like, I don't want to name anybody.
That
I
was-
just want to
that was
talk
my
about the
fault.
topic.
I
Well,
dragged
I wanna
it.
talk
I
about the
dragged
I
big-
it.
came in at like 10:45, and it was already. I wrote
I
mean,
9:45, and it
But
That
I
was
mean,
my fault.
compared
I
to
dragged
what
it.
inspired this was the internet being full of snakes.
I'm thinking
The
30,
snakes
30,000
caused
feet.
we
people.
already know that. Like, we should have started there, and then say, okay, in light of that, how then shall we live? Like, but we've yet to have that.
So what I
That
what I
part.
tried to do with my very long-winded summary of things was I tried to kind of say that I tried to find that as much as this is all hyper real, I tried to find the places that were in fact genuine, because I think that each past
I
all the
appreciate
hyper
that.
real kayfabing, I believe that both sides of that argument had a genuine windmill or ghost that it was reacting to, and that was the
Yeah.
conversation worth having. And we ended up, and
That
then
was.
after we had that, we ended up in basically the same spot. The "how then shall we live" was basically what Matt Reese just said, which is it's not just about the media; it's how you integrate it into your life. And there's very clearly a mature way to enjoy immature things.
Well, and I want to flash back on
Yeah.
that real quick too, because you took us to back to 1 Corinthians 13, right? And I think that's there's a very real integration of those things, right?
Okay.
Because I was talking about duty
Mhm.
when I brought it up, that the part of the point of a mature life is a dutiful life, and the people that are involved in that. But that's what love is, right? Love is that decision to seek out the betterment of other people. It's not just the warm fuzzies or whatever it is. It's that commitment, and it is a duty. And I think that there is a real doesn't necessarily have to be a one-to-one, but I think that there is a corollary between living this dutiful life and serving the people around you in love, and then the fun stuff is icing of a dutiful life.
When your kids look at you and they say, "I can't wait to grow up so I can do whatever I want," and you look back at them and think, this is probably the last time in your life you're going to do whatever you want.
That's to know you grow up so you can do whatever you need.
So that other people, so that your kids can do what they want.
So your kids can do what they want until it's their time to do what they need. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Mm.
Whew, well,
Yeah,
2.5
but you can't.
hours,
And then we all agree that you can't do that online, though.
What?
You can't say that online and get
Yeah.
attention.
Well, and I mean, and that's one of the things that I think factors into this too. Side note is that like Twitter is a horrible platform to try to have that conversation, because you have to be pithy, and pithiness misses because whenever you start a tweet, this is something maybe I'm wrong on this, but tell me if I'm wrong. I believe that whenever you start reading somebody's tweet, you are reading like your perception of that person from Twitter, right? Right? Like you filter it through through your own self. You filter through interactions you've had with them. You filter it through who they're responding to, the tone
You start
that they're
with a tone
responding
in
with.
mind before you even
You
read
start with the
words.
end in mind. So by the time you get to 240 characters, you may not, if you can't. I think that if you don't have the discipline, and I think nobody does. I'm sure that I don't, to really separate those statements down to what they're actually saying. Then I think you read into them meaning that's beyond that. And so maybe my whole take has been too ungracious, because because other people are reading things that aren't there and are responding to things that aren't there. But maybe it's not dishonesty. Maybe it is just perceptional blindness, because people are expecting to see something.
I think you're onto something there. No, I think that's something to flesh out more. But I think that's a worthwhile thought.
In some ways, that's something that can only be told by the person who you feel is taking that tack on it.
Yeah,
And
and I agree. This is why I said I think a lot of this is people talking past each other,
Well, I know
because
there's
a lot of it is
definitely
like I'm saying something, but I'm responding to what I thought I read, even if I'm
Right.
not responding to the actual thing. And then
Right.
they're saying something that might even be in line with what they actually said and what then they thought I said in response to that. So then there's a bunch of there's almost like two different conversations going on between two different people.
Can I get really boringly academic for a second?
Mhm.
So there's a type of rhetoric called Rogerian rhetoric, and it's actually supposed to be the solution to this. And so Carl Rogers was a psychologist. He came up with a type of debate or argument. It was kind of like a mixture of Matt Krotz would love it because it was a mixture between kumbayaing and debate. And so the approach
Isn't that
was
this show?
we're not so in the Rogerian
This episode.
maybe, but in the
This
Rogerian
episode.
model. Well, the Rogerian model it follows very distinct steps. Okay. And so step one is that the opponent has to say, this is what I think my opponent. So we have A and B, right? So A says, this is what I think B is saying. Am I correct in representing your position? And then B basically says, yes, you are representing my position correctly, or actually,
Yeah, I've seen that a lot.
and so the
I think
point
this
is
is
that
like my marriage counseling.
right before
Yeah, no,
before
yeah,
you even well, so to bring it home
Active
here, so
listening.
before you even get to the debate, both A and B have to essentially have a moment where the opposite side says the opponent's side in a way that the opponent can in fact agree with. And what this does is it's supposed to help cut through the talking past each other stage and get to a point where there's enough common ground where we're at least having the debate that we should have. And then it actually goes on from there and does some other things that are very different from most debates. I don't want to cover it all, but just that first
I know
step.
this is a lot of where the modern straw manning and steel manning kind of comes from, is from a lot of these principles of actually being able to establish who you're arguing against and that you understand what you're arguing against.
Well, and back to
In
what
counseling adjacent fields, we call that active listening, and that's part of
sorry,
conflict
what?
resolution, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so I'm just saying that Twitter never does this, but if they did,
Oh God, no.
but if they did, if some of them
Well, and
actually
it's-
did,
No, you wouldn't get attention that
Well, it's also not the space for that as far as direct replies and character counts, because you can't put 2 replies in a row without making sure that somebody's not replying to the first one. So you can't spend your first reply reestablishing what you think the person's saying and then be able to reply it, because then somebody else is going to come in and reply to your establishment reply, and it's just not the type of medium for that type of dialect.
so
that's fair. It's still a trash, obviously. We all know, we could have started here. We all know that it's not built for conversation. It's built to maximize how long your eyeballs are going to be fixed to that screen so that you can see more advertisements. You're the product, right?
Yeah.
We all know this. There's nothing controversial about that.
Even though the
So-
advertisers know that we're ignoring what they're putting out there.
Well, I
Yeah,
think
somehow,
it's incidental though. It grew to that because we actually look at Twitter. It's basically just supposed to be public texting, right? Even the character count, it was going back to the SMS, and it was like texting between friends. But now you're just texting publicly. And then it kind of just grew into this leviathan that it is now.
when it first was introduced to me and it would just come out, it was, look, this is what I'm doing today, and I can say it, and a bunch of my friends can see very shortly. I am at the cafe, I am, going to class. It was essentially it was pre-Instagram, I think. It was just supposed to be, so it turned into something else. And I don't want to just trash. I'm on Twitter a lot, so I can't trash talk it too much. I enjoy it.
My former writing partner Chris was on Twitter way back when, and he just loved it. And I just couldn't understand why anybody would want to do microblogging, letting people know. It's I don't want anyone to know any of these things about me. But I ended up getting on because there was a few acquaintances of mine. I've said this on the show before. From the early webcomic days, when I was first getting into webcomics, there were people that only were on Twitter, and I wanted to talk to these folks I hadn't talked to in a decade. So I jumped on, and my God, it's I don't know, video games.
Yeah, that's a fair way of putting it. We could probably put a pin in it there. Twitter is video games. Is that
Yeah.
academic for you, Matt Krotz? Twitter's video games.
Absolutely.
So okay, let's call this for now because it's been a long time. It's a 3-hour show, guys. Almost 3 hours, 2.5 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And,
you got 2 hours with us. So
Well, I was. Anyway,
That's what happens when we actually talk about something serious on this show.
Everything we talk about is serious. Anyway,
Child, I differ. It's all child. What are you talking about?
oh my gosh, footnote everything.
Just so everyone knows, the link to the Discord, the Ideal Comics Discord, is in the chat. One of the things I decided when I got done with college is I'm going to open the Discord up to people, more folks. So if you have any interest, copy paste that and join. I am limiting the number of people that can come in, but it never expires. So we'll see how that goes because I want to be able to manage it effectively. It's not super exciting. Twitless is there, Metal is there. Matt never shows up. I think. Are you in there, Cartoonicus? I can't remember. But...
He's in there.
Discord, I don't
I've
think
seen
I've
him.
ever really. Well, I've posted some things after the comics.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's not on it, but he's in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm lurking. I'm there.
Ooh, hey, I love this. Great summary. It's not childish to consume childish things, but it is to be consumed by them. That is my take, 100%.
That's good.
I love
another thing you can do for the Discord, though, if you want to be a bit more controlling, is you can basically set a role that's not the everyone role that you assign to somebody that actually lets them interact. Then people can come in, but they can't do anything until you basically approve them.
Oh, that's something. We'll see how that shakes out. Well, no, we'll see if people bombard it in the next few days and see what happens. I'll probably put it in the description when I get done. We'll just play it by ear. I'm not.
Chat, everybody raid the Discord.
Ooh, by the way, next week, I forgot to mention this. Next week, I want to bring back the die rolling single panel comic thing in the background while we have a conversation. That went really well past couple times we did it, and I think it's a winner to keep doing. So, so our artistic buddies will have plenty to play around with in the future.
That sounds fun. That sounds fun. Also, I want to point out Edming in the chat is shouting out Asterix the Gaul, which is awesome. Everybody should read Asterix. I agree.
Also,
entirely.
they have a Asterix movie on Netflix right now.
Is that the live action? Is that the live action thing?
That live action one.
Oh
Asterix
gosh,
goes
it looks
to China.
so cringe. It looks so cringe.
But I do know that you can read them, a lot of them, for free on Global Comics.
Yes, you can.
While you're there, check out Ideal Comics. We've got a bunch of stuff from across our universe for free.
Definitely.
I believe many European stuff, they were localized by Paper Cuts over there, so you can find them with the Paper Cuts brand. Same with the Smurfs.
Oh, nice.
There's a whole lot of Franco-Belgian stuff for you out there then. And Ideal Comics.
Make sure to check out Adventures of Omega Girl issue 3 on Indie Planet and superschool.com, and also forcesofgoodandevil.net.
Yeah, absolutely.
On my other YouTube home, The Gospel of Comics, we're going to be interviewing the auteur behind such movies as Bigfoot versus Illuminati, Trump versus Illuminati. We've arranged it so this Friday, I believe he's going to be on the show.
Incredible.
So I put the links over there in the side thing.
Oh,
so we're going to be talking to this guy. So he basically made a whole bunch of movies using Unreal Engine and free Unity assets stuff. So this could be fun.
Sounds brilliant.
That sounds
It is.
Amazing. Amazing.
Drop me a link.
The link's in the sidebar over here.
All right. Awesome.
Sweet. So, I'm going to go ahead and put that in the chat. Whoa, careful, computer. What are you doing, man?
And also definitely read X Dynamics Chaos.
I was going to say that next. You were not. I did not forget you, sir. Read X Dynamics Chaos.
And if we haven't mentioned it, Super School. That's the Cartoonix and Twitless do another comic too. There's all kinds of comics.
I heard there's also this comic called Kyrie. You should probably check out.
Oh, stop it.
Oh my gosh. Kyrie is genius though.
Are we still live?
You should definitely read it, but you should pronounce it correctly.
You get so angry at me every time I say Zine, and then you just go and do that.
Zine.
That's a
I
conversation.
got
That's-
permission. I see. Here's the difference. Matt Cross
He
gave
said you
permission
could say it
to
any way you want, though.
He said I could say it
Yeah.
any way I want.
No, I was rolling my eyes at shilling Kyrie.
Yeah.
That's total cringe.
Yeah. It's not. It's a really good book, and you should read it. It's
So last
possibly
year.
it's possibly the best book that is being made right now in this group.
Mm.
Although we are going to
Don't
be
read-
if you
Don't read Kyrie.
don't read Kyrie. No, do.
Thank you.
Um,
Much better.
Also, the Force of the Good and Evil on Webtoon, we are going to be dropping a new page on Friday. So that's also something that's going on with art by Mrs. H, who was here and I think left, but that's fine. She may have left when I left. I don't know.
We didn't get like I don't know, an adult.
She's been
pickle
real
or
busy.
something.
I don't think there's pickle time in her life right now, and that's okay. So
We'll enjoy them whenever they can come back. So
Yes,
we miss it.
absolutely.
We miss it.
And she
Can't-
put
can't wait for it.
Picklish things behind her.
yeah. So
And that's a wrap. Okay.
that's a
I
show.
don't think we're-
Go out there, read some
Pretty
comics.
comic.
Oh, hey, guys! One last thing. Has anybody besides me, and I haven't finished it, read Code of Honor by Chuck Dixon?
Not yet.
Mm.
No.
It was intended to be the sequel to Marvels, and somebody on the Marvels team got all fussy and complained to Marvel editorial. I'm 2 issues in. It's fantastic. It's so good.
Really?
Yeah, it has a bunch of different people that did the painted art, so it's not as consistent, but the story is it's the 70s. It's the groovy 70s Marvel. It's very nice.
Oh, neat.
It's a cop drama set in the groovy 70s Marvel.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I'm a big
Anyway.
fan. I like. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, that's
Okay.
Cartoon had a great, perfect ending. We're putting ticklish things behind us. Keep reading
I had
comics.
interrupted with talking about comics. Go read. Get out there. Get away. Go read comics. Go on. Get out of here.
But don't
Go.
be consumed by them.
Go.